The main character of this story is a young man named Shin Hyun. It all started with an ordinary family road trip that, in a single heartbeat, turned into a blood-soaked car wreck. He was supposed to die, but instead of heaven, he opened his eyes in a completely alien, nightmare-level unfamiliar world. He fought to get back home, until the system materialized before him and coldly ordered him to complete his training. An unknown force carved the origins of a divine martial art straight into his body. Until he fully mastered that technique, the road home would remain sealed. Months blurred into years, and with them, the hope inside Shin slowly burned out. One day, the silence shattered with a notification. The system announced that his training was complete. The world around him began to warp, and tears filled his eyes as he believed he would finally see his sister and parents again. But when the doors swung open before him, he realized this was not Earth. The world he had returned to was called Murim, and this was where he was now destined to live. Rage ignited in his chest, as if someone had brutally mocked his last shred of hope. A man's voice echoed from the darkness, and Shin's heart clenched tight. This world runs on different rules. Only the strongest survive. A prisoner had escaped, ready to do anything just to avoid starving to death. Shin stood one step from death and had to choose, become the predator or die as prey. It all happened so fast he barely processed what was going on. The divine technique flared inside him and guided his hand, allowing him to kill his attacker. He stared at the body in disbelief. He was a killer now, even though not long ago he had been just a normal kid from a decent family. While his thoughts spiraled, the system dryly announced his level had increased. In that moment, he understood how this world worked and let out a nervous laugh, like a psycho who just forgot the password to his own crypto wallet. The origins of the divine art, cultivation, and leveling up were all links in one brutal chain. To return to his home planet, he had to reach the absolute peak, fighting and killing, again and again. This path was not just hard, it was paved in blood. Decades passed, and the boy who once feared the dark vanished without a trace. Now, he is the most dangerous swordsman in Murim, a name whispered in fear. They call him the Supreme Sword Emperor, a man with nothing left to lose. He kills with his eyes closed and sleeps without nightmares, his conscience buried long ago. A single swing of his blade is enough to split flesh apart and lay bone bare. His cruelty has birthed countless enemies, all thirsting for his death. Yet no matter how many armies gather against him, none can reach the Supreme Sword Emperor. He stands on a level untouchable to the rest, all thanks to that cultivation technique. Sometimes he fights barehanded, and a single touch is enough to crush even Murim's strongest swordsman. Today, he beheaded the leader of a demonic cult and wiped out all his inner circle. By evening, Shin returned to his grim hideout and sank once more into bottomless solitude. He grew so bored, he seriously considered founding his own dark sect just for the chaos. He had lived in Murim for over 140 years, though his sense of time had long since fractured. Over those years, everything lost its flavor, and his will to continue slowly drained away. He once dreamed of witnessing the fall of this world, yet he could no longer remember his family's faces. Every day he existed like an NPC in a game where the devs forgot to code an exit button. Endless killing burned the emotions out of him, and that was when fate decided to step in. A system window flashed before his eyes with a congratulatory message. He had reached the maximum level and fulfilled every requirement of the system. After all those years, he was finally granted a chance to return home, almost like a twisted joke. It felt as if the gods despised him, because his family might already be dead and no one could be waiting anymore. A portal tore open from the void, forged by an unknown power. The man who had reached the realm of the divine was finally returning to his home planet. Long-buried emotions surged back and flooded his heart. He had long suspected his family was gone and had gradually lost the desire to return. And so now his heart held only one thing: cold, merciless vengeance. He wants only one thing: to hunt down and erase the one who thought turning his life into a cruel cosmic prank was a good idea. And if he ever reaches that twisted god in person, he will rip the heart straight out of his chest without blinking. The world around him warped. Blinding flashes tore through space, and in that instant, the main character's fate was rewritten forever. His body slowly dissolved into the distorted reality, leaving no trace of the long years he had survived in Murim. Now rewind the clock to 2011, just days before Shin Hyun was dragged into that fatal crash. In a dark, lifeless forest, an unknown goddess appeared and began speaking words that felt wrong, heavy, ominous. She sensed that nightmares were about to become reality because monsters were already moving in from every direction. Humanity had to evolve fast, or it would be wiped out completely. No reset, no comeback. People would have to fight the very horrors that once existed only in their worst dreams. Massive, abyssal beasts would not stop, would not negotiate, and would erase everything in their path without mercy. Only by uniting and dropping their petty conflicts would humanity have a real shot at stopping the madness and restoring their planet. Now jump forward to the present, 2025, where Korea has changed beyond recognition. Inside the Red Wolf dungeon, a team that looks upbeat and confident at first glance has gathered for today's raid. A girl with a rare archer class ability is desperately fighting against a dense swarm of monsters right now. Her technique, Resolute Arrow, has saved her more than once in places where other fighters completely broke down. With a precise, perfectly timed shot, she saves an ally and gives the team a chance to clear the dungeon. She has long been recognized as the team's leader, and her name is Cha-eun-sol. She lost her family early and chose the path of a hunter to survive and keep from shattering in this insane world. Just when the raid seems to be running smoothly, one massive red wolf throws everything into chaos. It slips behind a hunter and clamps a brutal grip around his throat. By this point, most of the team has already been slaughtered, and even the captain is on the edge of real, barely controlled panic. She scans her surroundings frantically, realizing she has never faced a situation this hopeless. A huge pack of red wolves surrounds the captain, and one terrified warrior decides to exploit the chaos. So Shin Hyun abandons his captain and bolts toward the portal without looking back, determined to reach Earth at any cost. To get to that bastard, someone would first have to break through the swarm of enraged beasts. They multiply by the second, and the team's survival odds are dropping in real time. So Jun has long been used to thinking only about himself, and his conscience clocked out years ago. The moment he realizes the team cannot be saved, he chooses without hesitation to save only his own skin. When the portal finally comes into view, relief washes over him like a massive weight falling off his shoulders. Only a few steps remain, but a blazing arrow slams down in his path. Karma hits faster than a Tate ban on X. Sol refuses to ignore such pathetic desertion and labels him a spineless worm who deserves to lose his head. She is seconds away from exploding with fury, knowing that without Sojun's betrayal, many teammates could have survived. The guy feels zero regret and even tries to coldly justify his actions. His arrogant words push Sul past her limit, and rage floods her heart like wildfire. But the cunning, calculating rich kid has no intention of going down without a fight. He never wanted to die, and he definitely does not plan to live with everyone calling him a coward. So Jun understands perfectly that once they return home, his disgrace will be exposed to everyone. To prevent that, he decides all witnesses must disappear, fast. He activates a magical burst of energy and channels the entire surge straight at the captain. One devastating strike is enough to drain Sul of the last of her strength. She cannot stand, and consciousness slips away as her head slams hard against the stone. So Jun takes advantage of the moment, staring down at her with a mocking grin, feeling like the ultimate winner. All that remains is the final blow, and for a man without conscience, that is easy work. But the instant he swings to silence the witness of his weakness, the heavens distort and thunder crashes as lightning slams into the ground. It happens so fast that So Jun cannot even process what just went down. He freezes and slowly turns because behind him stands a tall figure in a strange, unfamiliar outfit. The long-haired man has just returned from 140 years of relentless, brutal combat. Then Shin lets out a loud, hoarse laugh as if genuinely appreciating yet another twisted joke from the gods. His eyes ignite with bright blue flame, locked onto one clear objective: find and kill the one who made him suffer. But before he steps forward, his attention locks onto a young man radiating a vivid, pulsing red aura. Behind him stood a girl whose face hit Shin with a wave of painful familiarity. Shin calmly walked past the enraged killer and headed straight toward her, as if the man did not even exist. He studied her features, feeling something long buried echo inside his chest. So Jun could not ignore what was happening, because the number of witnesses to his weakness kept rising. He knew he had to kill them all and get back home as fast as possible. Once again, he compressed blazing energy into a single point, preparing to unleash a crushing strike. But this time, his skills meant nothing in front of true divine power. One short flare of aura was enough to completely shut down his attack. This is what it looks like when two people exist on entirely different tiers of strength. The gap was absurd, and Seo-jun could do absolutely nothing about it. In the final seconds of his life, he stared into bright blue eyes, unable to even twitch. The Supreme Sword Emperor released his power, not for revenge, but to ensure he would never again see his sister on the brink of death. He needed no sword, no spear. A single touch was more than enough. The strength he had stockpiled for 140 years erupted outward and erased any chance his enemy had. The impact was so overwhelming that even beyond the dungeon, people felt the earth tremble. Seo-jun's head turned to ash, and that traitor would never betray anyone again. Afterward, the blood-streaked Supreme Sword Emperor walked toward his sister to heal her. As she lost consciousness, familiar childhood memories immediately surfaced. Dreams like these had haunted her for years, dragging her back to brief flashes of happiness. The little girl had once been upset, as if her brother were leaving not for university, but for Hogwarts with no return ticket. It meant less time together, and the end of their carefree childhood. Her older brother had promised things would be different, and that he would return every single vacation. They had even planned a full family day at the Central City Park. Those simple words made the little girl feel like the happiest person alive. Those carefree days left a permanent warmth in her memory. But everything shattered on the way to the park, when the entire family was caught in a horrific car crash. From that day on, Seul constantly blamed herself. She believed that if they had stayed home, her parents and brother would still be alive. Her parents died, her brother vanished without a trace, and her life was rewritten forever. At that moment, his cultivation technique gently activated, restoring her battered body. She felt a massive surge of energy and snapped awake like she had been hit with pure adrenaline. Seeing a stranger in front of her, she instantly tried to figure out who he was and what he wanted. But Shin remained calm, acting as if they had known each other for years. The pendant around her neck reminded him of their childhood, and he made it clear she had nothing to fear. Her heart tightened painfully, and a salty tear slid slowly down her cheek. It felt impossible, even though life had already proven the impossible could happen. The brother who disappeared years ago had suddenly returned without warning, and it was the happiest news she had ever received. Warm embraces made her forget everything, allowing her to feel true peace for the first time in years. Then she jolted upright, remembering the traitor who was supposed to be executed. But there was no need to worry. That guy had already lost his head. However, joy quickly turned into anxiety, and Seul insisted that her brother go home immediately. A few hours later, they found themselves in a quieter, safer environment. His sister brought him to their family apartment, hoping to shield him from the coming storm. The problem was that Seo-jun was the son of the director of the influential Dawn Guild. The director's name is So Kang, and he used to be part of a criminal organization. Countless rumors surround his brutality, and he is also one of the strongest hunters in Korea. Very soon, he will learn about the incident and begin hunting the team's captain. Seol is the only survivor of the dungeon, which makes her the prime suspect. But her brother sees no issue. He is fully prepared to kill the guild director without hesitation and settle everything once and for all. He calmly reminded her that he had become the Supreme Sword Emperor and that she truly had nothing left to fear. His sister was not impressed by the dramatic flex and straight up called him insane. She told him he was acting like a guy who just rolled in from some remote village and had zero grip on reality. As Shin looked around, his eyes landed on an old family photo hanging on the wall. The faces of their parents came rushing back, along with a crushing sorrow that not even an ocean of alcohol could wash away. Their parents were gone, but at least he could be grateful he had found his sister. His strange way of speaking and outdated clothes, however, had a clear explanation. Shin had spent long years in a world called Murim and still did not understand why all of it had happened to him. Now, it was time to learn the truth and hear a full breakdown of what had gone down on Earth. Who were hunters? What missions did guilds handle, and where had these monsters even come from? Did Earth really have a leveling system too, where strength had to be constantly upgraded? The sheer volume of questions made Seul feel like her head was spinning out of control. She promised to explain everything, but first, she had to deal with one urgent and dangerous problem. The girl quickly got ready and headed for the Dawn Guild before it was too late. Her brother stayed behind, slowly looking around, trying to recall how he once ran through these rooms as a child. He also thought about his sister, who had clearly grown stronger than most ordinary humans over the years. Now, he had a new objective, not only to get revenge on the gods, but to become the kind of brother strong enough to protect her. In the middle of his thoughts, a sharp knock echoed at the door, and he instantly sensed trouble. On the doorstep stood not his sister, but killers armed to the teeth. Most of them wielded magical skills and advanced combat techniques. These guys did not look like they came to negotiate. It felt like a GTA raid squad that maxed out aggression and skipped everything else. One short moment was enough for Shin to realize that real fun was about to start. In front of him stood Kang himself, the fearless and brutally ruthless director of the Dawn Guild. He had come looking for Seoul, unaware that she had already gone to the guild's headquarters. The girl had moved ahead of the board, trying to eliminate suspicion before it even formed. Deep down, she knew this could end badly, but she had long grown used to living on the edge. A familiar female voice echoed across the parking lot, impossible to mistake. The beautiful and cold Legion High had long served as the vice leader of the Dawn Guild. Those who knew her personally simply called her Gina. She was genuinely surprised to learn that Seoul was the only survivor of the dungeon raid. The main character's sister visibly tensed, fully aware of who she was speaking to. Before her stood one of the 4 strongest hunters in Korea, and one wrong phrase could cost a life. Gina was known for her unwavering nature and harsh sense of justice, but could she truly be trusted? While Seoul struggled to decide her next move, her brother found himself in deadly danger. He stood alone against 3 armed killers, yet he was not even slightly afraid. Calm as ever, he reminded them that entering someone else's home without permission was not exactly polite. The tension thickened by the second, but the guild director did not rush to start a slaughter. He needed to know where Seoul was because speaking with her was a matter of principle. At that point, Shin stopped holding back and bluntly declared that his sister had nothing to do with it. He was the one who killed Kang's son. Hearing that, Kang detonated faster than a streamer after hearing the word skill issue. He looked like a cornered beast, and that seemed to be exactly what Shin wanted. If this man posed such a threat, then he had to be eliminated here and now. The Supreme Sword Emperor activated his basic skills and prepared to remove yet another enemy. At the same time, he clearly understood that this was no ordinary fighter, but a seasoned and well-trained warrior. Kang's sword was infused with a strange mix of aura and energy from different sources. It seemed this was the kind of ability hunters possessed, just as Seoul had described. For someone who had spent almost his entire life in Morium, it was genuinely fascinating to witness. Even so, he did not feel the slightest fear toward these flashy red aura tricks. Although the consecutive strike technique was considered nearly unbeatable, to Shin, it was nothing more than a light warm-up. In his previous life, he had faced countless martial masters on an entirely higher level. His combat experience had grown so vast and refined that now he could fight almost playfully. The boss could not process it. Until this moment, no one had ever managed to block his strike. He instantly called for backup and ordered the long-haired guy in the strange robe to be beheaded. The professional killers rushed in without hesitation, earning every cent of their paycheck. Confident they could assist their boss, they immediately unleashed a fireball technique. The main character sensed the surge of power behind him. Like everyone else was still throwing hands in a schoolyard fight while he had already stepped into a UFC final. His opponents smirked, convinced they were about to roast this so-called rookie. But deep inside, the boss felt unease creeping in and signaled one of his men to deliver the decisive blow. The moment the blade came down, it was caught barehanded by the cultivation master. One brief touch was enough to shatter a sword forged by Korea's finest smiths. Shin made it painfully clear why he had once been regarded as the strongest warrior in all of Morium. His heavenly aura crushed every incoming attack with ease, and for a second, the battlefield seemed frozen. Seoul had said only 14 years had passed on Earth, but Shin already knew that for him, it had been 140 in Morium. During that time, humanity had also advanced significantly, reaching impressive combat heights. Now, there were many in this world whose mastery had reached peak rank, yet none of them came even remotely close to Murium's top 10 masters. Shin could not help recalling his past when he fought those labeled living legends. Those brutal battles had tempered his spirit and character, forging him into an unbreakable warrior. He was used to standing alone against entire crowds and never once complained about fate. Whoever stood before him always met the same outcome, swift and merciless death. After finishing the job, the Supreme Sword Emperor simply gazed into the distance, savoring the feeling of absolute dominance. Now let us shift the scene for a moment and return to Central Seoul. At that moment, his younger sister was riding in a car alongside the vice leader of the Dawn Guild. Seoul usually spoke only the truth, but now she did not know who to trust, so she carefully measured her words. From their first exchange, Gina had already pieced together the details of the incident and proposed a highly advantageous deal. She requested a meeting with Seul's older brother and in return promised to bury the case involving the guild director and his son. Offers like that were hard to refuse, though her true intentions remained unclear. During the drive, Gina asked more and more questions, trying to determine how long Shin had been absent from this world. It almost felt like she understood exactly where the main character had truly been. She knew that 14 years on Earth equaled 140 years in Murim, which meant the man who returned from hell now carried terrifying potential and elite-level skill. On top of that, he had always been intelligent, making his battle IQ one of his greatest advantages. Before the ride ended, his sister admitted that her older brother was unbelievably stubborn and always finished what he started. As if hearing her words across the city, he continued fighting criminals in his apartment with cold precision. His enemies no longer had the option to retreat, even as Shin openly mocked them. He flipped into full John Wick mode, minus the dog, or no one in the building would have survived. Against a fighter like this, even the most intricate magical techniques seemed useless. After so many years in Murim, there was almost nothing left that could surprise Shin. Their fire and ice abilities failed to impress him. After Murim, it felt like warm-up drills. He wielded similar forces himself and could unleash his talent even at the brink of exhaustion. At some point, his opponents realized their fatal mistake and tried to scatter in different directions. But the Supreme Sword Emperor had no intention of letting them escape. Every sinner pays. Within a few intense minutes, the Dawn Guild director stood completely alone. The powerful support that once helped him eliminate enemies had already been sent straight to hell. If he believed himself so strong, now was the time to prove it without bodyguards. Before the final clash, Kang drew his legendary sword, clearly hoping to intimidate his opponent. He still could not grasp what was happening and accused Shin of using dark magic. It was impossible for him to comprehend the level of a man forged in a completely different world. Different laws had shaped Shin into a warrior of another scale, and on Earth he would be seen as a dangerous and unnatural killer. Words ran out, and the final round of this merciless battle began. Cornered with nowhere left to run, the boss triggered the final stage of Berserk, his last card on the table. The Berserk explosion technique drains every drop of energy from a hunter's body, leaving nothing behind. It is insanely risky because once activated, recovery is almost impossible. In exchange, the hunter gains a single devastating shot, capable of killing nearly any opponent in one blow. Blinded by rage over his son's death, Kang threw every rule of caution out the window. With one precise movement, Shin shattered Kang's legendary sword for good. Disarmed and exposed, Kang only needed a final push to be sent to meet his maker. Shin executed it flawlessly, surgical precision with zero room for survival. Blood painted the room once again, as if dramatic endings were simply his default setting. In less than 10 minutes, the apartment was fully cleared, and that familiar feeling of untouchable dominance returned. Moments later, the front door opened, and his sister stepped inside with Gina. The corpses in the living room did not sit well with her. The place looked like the Squid Game finale, just without the prize money. He had to explain that it was merely a modest housewarming gathering, nothing serious. It seemed that chaos had long ago become this guy's favorite hobby. Beside his sister stood the same woman who had looked at Shin like an angel descending from the sky. From the outside, it might have seemed like love at first sight, but this was not romance. She recognized one of her own, someone who had also returned from another world. The currents of their divine cultivation arts clearly resonated with each other. They understood each other almost without words. Their Murim-born power echoed in sync, like a direct line between them. For the first time, he met someone who truly understood him. But whether that meant friendship remained uncertain. Sometime later, his younger sister decided to rest after everything she had endured. She lay down, hoping to sleep and forget the chaos, even if only for a moment. When Seul woke up, she heard the front door slam shut. Her heart pounded wildly, and she instantly thought the guild had come to avenge their boss. Then, a familiar voice reached her ears, and she finally managed to breathe again. It was her older brother, who had decided to change his appearance after returning. Seul fully regained her senses and realized with relief that his return was not a dream. He cut off his long hair and ditched the robe to blend in with ordinary people. Using modern technology, Shin gradually readapted to his home planet, catching up on everything he had missed. A full week had passed since his return, and life slowly began stabilizing. The vice leader of the Dawn Guild understood that he needed time to adjust. She suggested meeting later, yet only hours afterward, she sent men in black suits to his home. They efficiently conducted a full cleanup, removing every trace of blood and every body. The next day, the news reported that the Dawn Guild's director had unexpectedly retired. Gina swiftly seized control of the guild and kept her promise. Despite the failed raid, the guild did not severely punish the surviving captain. Sol was granted several weeks of leave and spent them beside her returned brother. And then the moment of truth arrived. A proper meeting had to take place. Gina was ready to fire off every question she had for the man who came back from Murim. She had placed him under constant surveillance, tracking his every move. She insisted it was merely protection and asked her new acquaintance not to overreact. They ordered fragrant herbal tea to ease into the serious discussion. Gina had once drunk a similar tea in Murim when she was just starting out there. During the conversation, it became clear that only 3 people had ever returned to Earth from Murim. Besides Gina and Shin, there was one more warrior who had survived the other world. His name is Park Tae-hoon, and he now leads the Twilight Guild. The Twilight Guild, alongside Dawn, controls the Korean Hunter Association, though tension between them is rising fast. Everyone who entered Murim received the same directive: level up until the day they could return to Earth. After returning, they realized their home planet had changed. The era of hunters and dungeons had begun. It remains unclear whether this was duty, punishment, or someone's twisted cosmic joke. But one thing is certain: the world has flipped upside down, and the journey to Murim was never random. Dungeons and monsters started spawning the exact moment the goddess's revelation descended 14 years ago. Along with that came a system of classes and abilities, and people slowly began awakening hidden talents within themselves. The wildest part was that Gina and Mr. Park both returned to Earth only after dying in Murim. She was convinced the same had happened to Shin, though his case had played out differently. They had been ordered to witness the destruction of that world, and only then would the path home unlock. Hearing this, Shin let out the faintest smile, a predatory, almost demonic curve of the lips. Past events flashed through his mind as he started connecting the dots. The goddess had sent him to another world, where reaching the maximum level in martial arts meant a ticket back to Earth. If the system runs on the same rules everywhere, then hitting max level on Earth should trigger a reward too. And it definitely is not a participation trophy. Once Shin reaches that peak, he intends to get every answer straight from the goddess herself. But first, he wanted to know why Gina had urgently requested this meeting, and why she chose to help his younger sister. After that question, her expression shifted slightly, and she suggested taking a walk. The Dawn Guild had been locked in a brutal rivalry with the Twilight Guild for years. Now that Dawn's leader was dead, Shin had essentially erased their greatest pillar of power. Gina offered him a place in her guild, the position of executive director, along with fame and serious money. She understood perfectly that such an offer was hard to turn down. Yet despite the tempting deal, Shin calmly refused. He had always operated solo and had no intention of changing that rule. On top of that, he had zero plans to serve someone he considered weaker than himself. The vice leader did not appreciate hearing that, so she decided to test right then and there who was stronger in reality. Time spent in Murim reshapes each person differently. Shin had already defeated opponents who lived in Murim for over 300 years. Even knowing this, Gina refused to back down. If there was even a sliver of a chance, she would push it to the limit. She unleashed her full magical power and uttered a short word in an unknown language. That word ignited her mana and directed a concentrated stream of energy straight at her opponent. Shin looked almost too relaxed, raising the question of whether he was being reckless before a serious clash. Gina's innate ability was a skill known as Shadow Dance. It was said that once this technique was activated, no hunter had ever survived. Its range was overwhelming. Everything around them faded into a pale, distorted version of reality. From the outside, it appeared as if the two hunters had simply vanished into thin air. Gina once revealed that in Murim she had been called the Bloody Cherry Blossom. She never failed missions and could eliminate targets even with her eyes closed. After Shin hinted at her weakness, she had no intention of holding back. Gina released everything she had and challenged him to a lethal dance. A single instant was enough to draw her blade and close the distance. She already felt like she was about to secure another effortless victory, and at that very moment a cold blue flame ignited in Shin's eyes. He shifted aside instantly, evading the killing strike. No matter how she tried to slice his throat, he displayed a terrifying reaction speed. To him, the entire fight seemed to move in slow motion. He saw not only the movement, but even the intent to strike before the blade was fully swung. It almost felt like the Supreme Sword Emperor was merely analyzing his opponent. He gave himself time to gauge her limits and dissect her unique style. Gina had long mastered the martial art of Mirim's greatest assassin, the Dark King. This technique was called Moonlight of the Bloody Path, and Shin had heard of it before. Once, he had battled a master of a similar style, and that fight had been especially brutal. Even with slight inexperience back then, it took him only 1 second to kill that opponent. But now, they stood on the same side, and ending this clash in death would be pointless. Shin allowed her to display all her skills, and if she managed to defeat him, he promised to join Dawn. But if she lost, he wanted her to never bother him again with those tempting offers. The second round officially began, and the air itself darkened under the rising intent to kill. Gina did not hide her intentions and pushed everything she had to break this overconfident fighter. She seemed to dissolve into space itself, reappearing to strike from impossible angles with surgical precision. Her moves were cold and calculated, but Shin operated on an entirely different tier. His heavenly blue flame technique instantly burned away every stream of bloody mana. He defended calmly and confidently, not even revealing how serious the clash truly was. No matter how Gina chained her skills together, she could not breach a truly dangerous distance. For her, this became the toughest trial in years. She admitted to herself that the man before her deserved to be called one of Mirim's strongest, which meant if she managed to win, she would officially stand as the #1 assassin. With cryptic phrases, she tried to distract him and disrupt his concentration. In that instant, torrents of bloody mana surged from every direction, ready to tear Shin apart. She activated another skill, Shadow Dagger. For the first time in the battle, Shin felt his reaction speed slightly decline. He realized the game was over and activated the Mind Sword technique. Long ago, an ancient master had passed this technique to him, forever altering the fate of an ordinary boy. The waves of bloody mana met an unseen resistance and began to scatter. Gina grimaced and instinctively stepped back from the most overwhelming energy surge she had ever witnessed. A massive stone fragment suddenly hovered above her, ready to crush bone and flesh alike. Her body would not respond, and her mind could not deploy another defensive barrier in time. She closed her eyes, accepting that this was the end and that her opponent was stronger. At the last second, the stone was obliterated by a single precise strike from the master. He had no intention of killing her, only of making his superiority painfully clear. Gina acknowledged defeat and returned them both to reality. She might never challenge him again, but she still needed one final answer. For a moment, it felt like she had fought something beyond resistance. Gina wanted to know the name of that technique and where it could be learned. Shin explained that everything he mastered came through divine cultivation arts. During the fight, he had also revised his decision and partially accepted Dawn Guild's terms. If the guild provided material support and all necessary intel, he would offer force when required. He would not become a full partner, more like an independent ally operating on freelance terms. When the guild faced a serious threat, they could call him and expect intervention. Shin refused to live under constant surveillance, which was why he proposed this kind of alliance. Gina agreed, but only on the condition that he would never cooperate with the Twilight Guild. With the core terms settled, the deal was sealed with a handshake. Shin swore in the name of the Supreme Sword Emperor, and from that moment they became official partners. Before leaving, he decided to ask a few questions about her combat style. He wanted to understand why she chose the path of an assassin, and she gave him an honest answer. Inside her lived a desperate urge to kill, constantly pushing to break free. By Shin's reaction, it was clear he understood exactly what she meant. In Mirim, he too had felt himself slowly consumed by the hunger for battle and blood. Perhaps all of it was tied to the influence of the gods who staged this cruel spectacle. After the dangerous clash, Gina returned to her car where her driver was already waiting. He was visibly shaken when he saw his boss covered in blood. It was obvious that the man she fought possessed rare and extraordinary talent. If that was true, he should be sent to the upcoming Hunter Festival. Let the entire world see what a real monster looks like. The idea was bold, but the risks were massive. Gina's mind swirled with restless thoughts. She repeatedly recalled her encounter with the god of heavenly war, the meeting where she had nearly lost her life. To never again taste that kind of humiliation, Gina had to fortify her guild and level herself up far beyond her current limits. A little later, Shin finally returned home after all the intense talks and draining battles. His sister immediately rushed into his arms, noticing he had taken damage after all. She looked genuinely furious and made it clear he should never act so recklessly again. He was not allowed to leave her alone anymore. They had already lost too many years. When Shin calmly stated that he intended to become a hunter, she was not thrilled in the slightest. He tried to ease her worries and showed her the mysterious cube Gina had given him. With that cube, a hunter could unlock their status window and officially begin their career. Shin had always lived on the edge and never feared blood, so on Earth there was really only one path for him. He needed to become a hunter and build a serious career in that world. He expected something flashy and overwhelming, but everything instantly veered off script. For a second, it felt like Gina had handed him a scam prop, like an influencer selling a success course and ghosting after payment. But the magical cube did activate, and a status window materialized out of thin air. On one side stood his Murim status window, where he had already reached the absolute peak. On the other side was the hunter window, where he was nothing but a rookie starting from zero. It turned out he did not even have a class, meaning his path would be completely different from everyone else's. Hunters were divided into 6 classes: warriors, guardians, mages, priests, archers, and assassins. Sol had always been an archer and never once felt ashamed of her class. Over time, she evolved into a sniper. Though every hunter begins at the base tier, it was strange that her brother had no class at all, as if the system labeled him an ordinary civilian. To level up, a hunter must earn experience points, and supernatural abilities are required to fight monsters. Without a class, it would be incredibly difficult to stand out, since the system officially deemed him too weak. He would have to spend massive amounts of money just to purchase basic close combat magic skills. Now, it made sense why rich but untalented players still level up. Money turns them into pros, just like pay-to-win meta. His younger sister clearly did not want him risking his life again. She reminded him that without funds, he would not even be able to buy skills, so living as a normal person made more sense. Did she not realize he had already signed a contract with Gina and was no longer short on resources? If he had refused that alliance earlier, things could have spiraled into serious trouble. Still, there was one key detail Shin could not wrap his head around. How could someone with overwhelming talent in Murim return to Earth and receive no class at all? The situation reeked of something suspicious, but he had no time to hesitate. Soon, brother and sister headed to the Dawn Guild's training dungeon. This was the Rabbit Dungeon, where rookie hunters took their first real steps. Here, they could train safely, farm experience, and gradually level up. Catching even a single rabbit required real effort. These small monsters were insanely fast. Many hunted them not only for experience, but for serious profit. Inside, each creature lay a moonstone, worth about a year's salary for an average teacher. It was a rare natural resource, resistant to decay and packed with colossal energy reserves. His sister urged him to stay extremely cautious, but he had clearly already made up his mind. Even without a class, he could use Murim techniques and remain a step ahead of every other rookie. That alone might make him the strongest newcomer in the entire hunter world. Sol tried to carefully explain all the rules, but Shin's expression suddenly shifted. As if sensing a hidden threat, he grabbed her hand firmly and insisted they move forward immediately. His instincts were clearly far sharper than those of ordinary hunters. Within minutes, he led his sister to a massive cluster of rabbits. There were more than 300 of them, enough to earn serious cash. Sol told him not to play hero, to stay behind her and watch how professionals handle it. Shin had long noticed her protective little sister syndrome and decided to act his own way. He felt zero embarrassment and wanted to power level his base stats as quickly as possible. If that meant using the Supreme Sword Emperor technique, he saw absolutely no problem with that. One heavy dramatic landing was enough to grab the entire clearing's attention in an instant. The filthy creatures immediately switched into max aggression mode, every nerve on edge. The moment rage took over, their fur flushed red, revealing their true murderous intent. Suddenly, a storm of pop-up windows exploded in front of Shin's eyes. They were system notifications directly tied to the development of his swordsmanship skills. The system kept warning him to be careful. A rookie was not meant to take on a horde like this. But Shin had never truly been a rookie. He survived in a world where everyone was a professional killer. So when the rabid rabbits charged him, not a single muscle on his face twitched. He swung his blade like a blender on overdrive, like a cooking show where the chef ignores every safety rule. The furious rabbits were shredded apart as if they were premium ingredients for some five-star restaurant. Blood sprayed everywhere, and the lush green grass quickly lost its color. The Supreme Sword Emperor seemed to genuinely enjoy this. At times, it felt like he would gladly bathe in rivers of blood if given the chance. When the clearing was carpeted in moon crystals, the system began spamming notifications like a glitched-out iPhone. Only then did the main character fully grasp where all this was heading. Thanks to his years of relentless training, he He reached the maximum level in swordsmanship. Most hunters would need years, even decades, to approach that kind of progress. His sister had never witnessed anything like this and was almost afraid to interfere. By achieving the perfect swordsmanship rank, he unlocked hidden bonuses, faster reactions, and noticeably reduced energy consumption. He felt the momentum building and realized that the more he killed, the faster his stats climbed. It reminded him of Murim, where the grind had slowly consumed him over the years. For the remaining rabbits, it meant only one thing: a death sentence, because stopping him was no longer an option. Now, Shin had a clear objective in mind: to become the strongest hunter in Korea. His martial arts would serve as the foundation to eventually surpass Mr. Park Tae-hoon. Witnessing her brother's power, Seol asked him for the first time to become her mentor. She had long faced prejudice and felt her true potential was never fully unlocked. For years, she blamed herself for her team's death and every crushing failure. At first, she tried to keep her brother away from danger, but now she saw it clearly. He was truly different. If that was the case, she wanted him to train her to the highest level. Seol no longer intended to live with regret and planned to make the world hear her name. Shin agreed without hesitation, warning in advance that he would be an extremely strict mentor. Once training began, family ties would no longer matter. For now, he suggested moving forward and collecting even more moon crystals. The core of this training method was simple: follow the master and learn through action. Under constant combat pressure, growth accelerates dramatically. It is far more effective than drowning in theory and memorizing endless boring rules. Rumors of a man wiping out entire rabbit legions spread quickly through the dungeon. The monsters decided to strike first, clearly overestimating their own strength. Shin shut them down instantly and made it clear who dominated this battlefield. Matching that pace would be difficult for Seol, so she could not afford to rush. Their activity drew even more enraged rabbit kings to the scene. At that moment, Shin recalled his recent battle and realized something was still missing. Gina had enhanced her techniques with special skills, which made her genuinely dangerous. Now, Shin wanted to find a unique skill that could merge with his Murim arts. He did not hesitate and immediately began experimenting. With a powerful push off the ground, he leapt upward like a DC Universe superhero. He remembered how one opponent had combined a fireball with combat control. Shin attempted something similar, fusing his techniques with his blue flame. Honestly, the result turned out even better than expected. His sister was instantly knocked to the ground, unable to withstand the overwhelming shockwave. The training could officially be called a success since another rabbit legion had been erased in seconds. It was hard to even imagine how many years of grinding Seol would need to get anywhere near that level. For now, she was stuck, living in his shadow, like the sidekick hero nobody remembers in the end credits. She decided to focus on gathering moon crystals first, at least being useful in some way. Meanwhile, her brother carefully dissected every detail inside the status window. It felt like the two systems were built by completely different entities, but for what reason? On one side stood the hunter system, where experience came from fighting monsters and gambling with your life. On the other was the Murim path, where progress crawled forward through endless, brutal training. When a warrior reached enlightenment, a fate-defining trial awaited. Each one received a personal origin manual of martial arts and limited time to master it. Most likely, the hunter system was created by that same goddess everyone kept mentioning. If that was true, Shin finally understood who had sent him to Murim. It could have been the very god of heavenly war that Gina often pondered about. Right now, almost nothing was known about that god, but the mystery was bound to unravel eventually. Meanwhile, the main character continued pushing through intense training toward his objective. After a month of exhausting battles, he unlocked multiple new skills and significantly raised his level. He fought creatures he had never even encountered in Murim. Those battles carried him all the way to level 22. At the same time, the older brother kept teaching his sister the basics of kinetic energy theory. She gradually learned how to channel her inner force within a short burst. Sometimes the training escalated into genuinely brutal and painful methods. Shin knew a way to purge dark energy from a person, but the process was extremely harsh. He warned Seol not to hold back, even if it meant coughing up blood. For a moment, Seol seriously thought her brother had decided to kill her. Minutes later, neighbors heard wild screams but had no idea what was happening. Strangely enough, that savage session allowed Seol to climb another level. By the very next day, she was visibly faster, stronger, and more resilient. Shin also met with Gina regularly, discussing the finer details of their alliance. It seemed she had formed a concrete plan and wanted the Supreme Sword Emperor to step into action. Shin expected to hear a serious proposal backed by clear strategy. Instead, he received an unexpected invitation to what sounded like a date. It was the first such invitation in his long life, and he honestly had no idea how to react. In reality, it was simpler than it sounded. A new dungeon had appeared nearby. It was classified as Danger Level 10, meaning only mid to high-rank hunters were allowed inside. Rather than assembling a large team, Gina suggested the two of them go alone and have some fun. She had long aimed to control as many high-risk dungeons as possible, though that was clearly not her only motive. The Dawn Guild leader also wanted Shin to progress as quickly as possible. She actively supported him, and he did not seem to mind the arrangement. Still, a logical question remained. What would Gina gain by turning him into a monster of the hunter world? Perhaps she was seriously considering the Sun Festival and wanted to present her new ally there. The festival was held annually by the Dawn and Twilight guilds, showcasing battles to determine South Korea's strongest guild. From the outside, it looked like a friendly tournament to maintain relations. In truth, it was the perfect chance to expose weaknesses and strike without mercy later. Twilight and Dawn constantly clashed over dungeon rights. Now, the tension had reached a boiling point, and full-scale war could ignite at any moment. The powder keg was ready to blow, even though everything once seemed stable. The Twilight Guild leader had suddenly begun grasping for power like a man possessed. He repeatedly claimed that everyone must follow the will of the heavenly god of war. Gina knew only fragments about this, but Shin was clearly intrigued by such declarations. Even if Mr. Park had received a direct command from the heavenly god of war, it was still unclear why he had developed such intense hatred toward Dawn and his former allies. In Murim, Gina and Park were more than acquaintances. They were comrades who backed each other up and shared the same fate. It cut deep to realize that now they stood as enemies, ready to aim for each other's throats at every encounter. To prevent open war, she asked Shin to step onto the stage of the Sun Festival and show his full power. Lately, the balance of power had clearly tilted toward the Twilight Guild. Day by day, they grew more aggressive, seizing dungeons and the key routes leading to them. If that imbalance became obvious during the festival, it would deal Dawn a devastating blow. The situation worsened after the guild lost its director and strongest fighter due to the interference of some madman. Now, Shin fully grasped the scale of the crisis and understood why she wanted him in that dungeon. He needed to raise his level significantly if he planned to appear at the Sun Festival. The tournament would be broadcast live, with the entire nation watching the winner. If Shin drew too much attention, fame would drag a wave of new trouble behind it. That was why it would be wiser to compete without relying on divine cultivation. He would have to depend strictly on hunter skills, nothing more, nothing less. As an advance, the Dawn Guild offered him rare skills that normally cost insane amounts of money. Before launching serious operations, he had to sign an entire stack of official documents. The world drowned in paperwork, like buying a phone and being handed a contract longer than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. Once the formalities were done, Shin received new skills and noticeably strengthened as a hunter. With preparations complete, they immediately headed to the next dungeon. Here, he would test his new techniques and accelerate his leveling process. In the monstrous bird dungeon, one mistake could cost a life, so underestimating the danger was not an option. Shin instantly scanned the area with his inner energy and detected over 3,000 monsters. For him, it was the perfect chance to warm up and reclaim peak form. Lately, he had been holding back and had almost begun to miss real combat. With one devastating strike, he made the first 100 monsters regret ever crossing his path. Even Gina did not expect such a leap in strength. During their duel, he had restrained himself, but now the gap was obvious. It seemed Shin was progressing too fast for anyone to keep up. With a single opening attack, he earned a massive haul of crystals without even breaking a sweat. But relaxing would be foolish. Those creatures were not the only threat in this dungeon. While Shin trained relentlessly, his future rival was enjoying a calm and comfortable life. In Seoul stood the luxurious villa of the Twilight Guild leader, Mr. Park Tae-hoon. That day, his closest subordinate, Kim Chul, reported that the new Dawn leader was acting suspiciously. Gina was actively supporting an unknown hunter who was not even registered with the association. The investigation revealed that this rookie was the older brother of Yoon Sol, a longtime member of Dawn. The young man's name was Shin, and he had been listed as missing for years. Hearing this, the guild leader sharply ordered his aide to stop talking. In his mind, the pieces immediately fell into place. It became clear that the former Dawn leader had died after crossing paths with someone who returned from another world. At last, Mr. Park received news powerful enough to break his boredom. If another returnee from Murim had appeared, the struggle for dominance would grow far more brutal. All that remained was to wait for their meeting and determine who would become this world's apex predator. Shin himself had no idea what consequences his return would trigger. Right now, he was simply leveling up, clearing dangerous dungeons one after another. With the magical crystals he obtained, he managed to fuse martial arts with his new hunter skills. Now, he commanded far more power than before. If Gina ever challenged him again, the outcome would be far more one-sided. Martial arts and magic now functioned as one seamless force, almost guaranteeing victory. Shin was eager to test this fusion in real combat, constantly pushing his partner to move faster. There was no time to waste, especially with the dungeon boss still alive. Those words clearly ignited something inside the Dawn Guild leader. Gina felt a surge of determination. She refused to fall behind and intended to grow even faster. She decided to cover his blind spot and personally wipe out every last flying freak without hesitation. She was not someone to underestimate, one of only 3 who entered Murim and returned alive. The fight proved far from easy. The dungeon had clearly been rated way too low. Once they returned, its danger level would have to be officially raised so rookies never stepped inside again. Until now, even well-trained 5-man squads barely managed missions like this. Only at this moment did Gina finally grasp the real issue. Out of nowhere, flying monsters appeared, far larger and more massive than the earlier ones. The dragon looked like it ordered dinner and brought security, like Drake showing up at a party nobody invited him to. Could it be that this dungeon hid 2 bosses in separate zones? The monster dropped all theatrics and instantly launched at the young hunter. She was only meant to secure the perimeter and calmly wait for her partner, yet suddenly, she was staring death in the face. The flying beasts surrounded her in a tight ring, leaving 0 room to retreat. In the air, they held a clear advantage, size, speed, and numbers on their side. It soon became obvious they were fueled by demonic power, and that was no coincidence. The entire dungeon system felt glitched, and surviving would take nothing short of a miracle. Gina felt the air thinning in her lungs like a heavy wave of panic crashing over her. And in that suffocating moment he appeared, the guy whose calm gaze sparked a flicker of hope. His instincts had long warned him something was off, but until now he could not pinpoint the source. With the situation boiling over, he would have to go all out to survive. Martial force fused with magic, and Shin flared brighter than any galactic star. He casually promised his partner grilled chicken for dinner and got straight to work. Enemy count meant nothing to him. In a few hours, this dungeon would belong to humanity. Watching the clash unfold, Gina felt almost hypnotized. She had never seen a martial artist summon such stable and overwhelming magic. It did not feel like standard hunter magic. His power seemed to operate on a higher plane, compressing space itself. But that did not mean he could relax. The monsters were adapting fast. Behind them, a massive green portal tore open, unleashing reinforcements, an entire airborne army. Shin appeared to ignore the scale of chaos, showing not a trace of panic. His composure stunned his partner so much that she rushed to support him instantly. She discarded fear and caution. They were irrelevant now. Pink mana flooded the battlefield, forcing part of the swarm to retreat. The dungeon's supreme boss grew even more furious, convinced he alone was king here. Watching humans reclaim his territory was unbearable. Gina quickly realized the main monster was not a mindless beast. It coordinated the swarm strategically. The boss and his massive guards constantly signaled their smaller subordinates. In response, the lesser dragons shielded their leader with their own bodies. They sacrificed themselves willingly to maintain territorial control. The battle would not end while those colossal beasts lived, and Shin clearly understood that. He remained unhurried, perfectly calm as if following a pre-written script. It was impossible to read his thoughts. He always seemed to be playing his own game. Gina got too caught up analyzing the battlefield and lost focus for a split second. That lapse cost her. A crushing blow sent her plummeting from a terrifying height. A passing dragon became her only chance to grab hold and stay airborne. She hopped across dragons like subway surfers, except here, missing meant death instead of an ad. Shadow Dance activated, and even a dragon's massive size would not save it. After the first precise strike, it became clear she could not hold alone without support. Too many creatures hungered to purge the dungeon of these irritating humans. Shin sensed the danger instantly and awakened the element of blue flame. He controlled multiple energy blades at once, delivering surgical strikes to every approaching monster. Entering a perfect flow state, he seamlessly fused magic and martial arts into one unstoppable force. One heavy sweep of his hand was enough to erase dozens, sometimes even hundreds of monsters in a single motion. It all flowed absurdly smooth, like he was not even trying. A single strike filled the entire battlefield with moon crystals. Shin cleared the perimeter completely, but that still did not solve the larger issue of the sudden dungeon breach. What if portals like this opened elsewhere, and hunters could not handle the endless invasion from another world? After today's fight, it was obvious the Sun Festival no longer felt like the main priority. A full investigation into the true source of the threat mattered far more. Gina would have to move carefully because her enemy was always somewhere nearby. Mr. Park would never miss a chance to strike the moment she let her guard down. Shin tried to pull his partner back to reality and steer her away from spiraling thoughts. He picked up a strange purple stone and studied it closely, searching for what made it different. It turned out to be a monster skill stone, a rare drop obtained after killing a dungeon boss. Gina quickly explained how it worked, then locked eyes with Shin. She hesitated slightly, blushed for a split second, and said something truly important. A full month passed, and now everyone was talking about the approaching Sun Festival. Posters covered every billboard, and people buzzed about the rookie who suddenly became the tournament favorite. His name was Shin, and more voices called him a true martial arts genius. They labeled him Dawn's secret weapon, and those words made certain people uneasy. Assistant Kim, who oversaw numerous operations within Twilight Guild, felt his footing slipping. Preparation for the tournament was in chaos, since no one truly knew who Shin was, where he came from, or where he spent the last 14 years. At an emergency meeting inside Twilight's headquarters, panic echoed through the room. Only the guild leader remained outwardly calm, reminding them he always kept an ace up his sleeve. He ordered silence and made it clear Twilight had no intention of losing the Sun Festival. Once the cards hit the table, it would be clear whether Dawn was bluffing or going all in. If necessary, Mr. Park would personally eliminate the new threat before it could grow. A few days later, an important meeting took place. In a quiet, low-profile cafe in Eastern Seoul, Assistant Kim had been waiting since early morning. He nervously watched the clock, wiped sweat from his forehead, and downed 3 strong espressos. Finally, the man he had been waiting for stepped through the door. For the meeting, Mr. Shin Hyun wore a sharp new suit and even woke up earlier than usual. He looked at Kim like he was about to negotiate with a naive child. Shin skipped all small talk and made it clear he would not waste his time. His icy confidence rattled Kim slightly, though he tried to keep composure. Today, Kim needed to extract as much intel as possible on the man already dubbed South Korea's new hero. They sat down and ordered coffee to create a calmer atmosphere. Kim then placed a compact magical device on the table known as a sound isolator. With a press of the central button, an invisible curtain formed around them, sealing out all external noise. Now they could speak freely without fear of eavesdropping. Twilight intended to offer Shin a full partnership instead of direct confrontation. It was exactly what he expected, but did they really believe negotiating with him would be simple? Shin reminded them immediately that he would compete at the Sun Festival under Dawn's banner. Twilight was well aware of his progress, having tracked every one of his raids. They knew he cooperated with Dawn, but that alliance was temporary. In truth, Shin operated like a one-man guild, working with Dawn strictly on his own terms. Once Twilight realized this, they moved to the next strategic step. If Shin agreed to join them, he would receive the most favorable terms in all of Korea. His achievements were impressive, yet Kim's pitch lacked specifics, too many promises, too few facts. After several minutes of polished talk, Shin lost interest and stood up. He refused to waste time listening to a glorified sales pitch. No matter how Kim tried to stop him, Shin ignored him and calmly walked out of the cafe without looking back. After that, the man who had remained buried in the shadows the entire time finally stepped forward and revealed his face. It turned out the leader of the Twilight Guild, Mr. Park himself, had been in the room all along. Through concealed earpieces, he had heard every word of the conversation and personally confirmed who he was dealing with. He had deliberately ordered his assistant to drag the meeting out, but Kim clearly failed the assignment. Kim was small fry, acting like he ran the game, when in reality he was background noise on a MrBeast video. What truly mattered was figuring out who Shin really was and why he so confidently saw himself as the strongest hunter in the world. If this guy truly intended to play in the big leagues, Mr. Park would gladly accept the challenge. The moment Shin stepped out of the cafe, he dialed his partner without wasting a second. The two of them always aimed to stay one move ahead, knowing that in this world, relaxing was fatal. Within the first minutes of speaking to the assistant, Shin sensed faint technological interference. He calmly scanned his surroundings and quickly realized someone was carefully listening in. That meant only one thing. Twilight was getting nervous because they could not read him. Gina sincerely thanked her ally once again for his support. Not long ago, he had greatly aided the guild by voluntarily investigating the strange dungeon breaches. She was ready to offer him anything in return, yet as usual, he asked for nothing. Then the voice of the Supreme Sword Emperor grew unexpectedly quiet, almost somber, unnaturally calm. He had reunited with his sister, and now a far more important mission stood before him. Slowly lowering his phone, he prepared to do what he had dreamed of since returning home. Unfortunately, this reunion with his parents was nothing like he had imagined. Through every brutal year in Murim, Shin had believed his mother and father would wait for him. But fate does not bend to human wishes. Coming here felt like a mistake because he struggled to contain his emotions, while his sister could not stop crying. He stepped aside to avoid looking at their parents' photo, unwilling to feel his chest tighten again. Shin had long forgotten how to show emotion, so from the outside it seemed like he did not care. Now all he could do was live in a way that would make his parents proud, even if they were gone. He had to protect his sister and ensure she felt completely safe in this broken world. And he had not forgotten his vow to kill the one who sent him into the madness of Murim. After all these years, he had changed so much that even simple words with his sister felt foreign. The former top student had turned into a cold-blooded killer, and his mind would never fully return to what it was. He still could not understand why it all happened to him, when once his life had been painfully ordinary. Suddenly, a Murim system window appeared behind him, revealing the smiling face of the god of heavenly war. That insane bastard dared to ask a single question. Why was Shin still choosing to remain in human form? The words sounded like pure mockery, zero logic, but very real threats behind them. The god of heavenly war ordered Shin to stop his so-called pointless resistance and promised to give him special motivation. Then he coldly swore to interfere in Shin's life again and leave him with absolutely nothing. Shin did not flinch. Instead, he felt excitement ignite and vowed to hunt that arrogant fraud down and tear him apart. All that remained was their inevitable meeting, and seeing who would walk away standing. The Murim system window vanished, leaving behind a bitter and unsettling aftertaste. A few days later, the long-awaited moment finally arrived. Fans across Korea had been counting down to this. Today, crowds flooded the city center to witness the nation's strongest hunters clash in person. The Sun Festival officially welcomed everyone to Seoul's main arena. Tickets had sold out within hours of release. People were ready to drop half their salary like it was a Taylor Swift concert. Except, instead of songs, injuries were guaranteed. Shin, experiencing something like this for the first time, felt as if he had stepped into the Olympics or a World Cup final. In truth, it felt even bigger. In the public's eyes, hunters had long surpassed ordinary athletes. Those who exterminated monsters in dungeons were seen as real-life superheroes straight out of a blockbuster. The Sun Festival existed to strengthen public trust and polish the heroic image of hunters. Shin looked intensely focused, sensing that far too much depended on today. To clear his head, he shifted topics and asked Gina to find him housing in a quiet, isolated location. After receiving a message from the Murim status window, he had started thinking seriously about security. The heavenly god of war's intentions were unclear, but they were clearly hostile. His younger sister could not stay close to him forever. Being near him meant standing in the line of fire. The suddenness of his words left Gina momentarily speechless. If the threat was real, distancing himself would not be protection. It would be a gift to the enemy. But Shin saw things differently now. He felt his sister deserved a better version of him. He had returned as someone colder, almost emotionless, like a corpse that clawed its way back from the grave. Their bond had grown tense because Seoul clearly sensed that her brother had changed. Gina rarely involved herself in family matters, but this time, she could not stay silent. She admitted that if her own brother said something like that, she would have hit him without hesitation. Shin needed to get a grip, accept responsibility, and stand beside his sister no matter what. For now, personal conflicts had to be shelved. The Sun Festival was about to begin. The guild assistant interrupted their exchange, snapping both hunters back to reality. That brief conversation forced Shin to reconsider his decision about moving away. As he approached the arena, he could hear the roaring crowd chanting hunters' names, demanding spectacle. The event would begin with an opening ceremony featuring Dawn's key figures, Gina and Jung Jun-ho. From Twilight's side, stability reigned as well. Veteran assassin Chan Sung, now vice president, was present. The audience could barely contain their excitement while discussing the two leaders. Once, Gina and Mr. Park had fought side by side as ordinary hunters dreaming of more. Now, they led two dominant guilds and stood ready to clash once again. Behind their polished smiles, anger and hunger for victory were unmistakable. Each was determined to prove their guild was Korea's strongest. From a distance, their exchange looked friendly, but the tension between them was razor sharp. She used to be his right hand. Now he stood guarded by a mere kid, like hiring security off a random ad. The vice president nearly stepped in, but Park signaled him to stay calm and endure Gina's sharp jabs. This time, Park was absolutely convinced he would eliminate his rivals and seize full control. He knew her weaknesses well and understood exactly where to strike. But Gina had no intention of backing down without a brutal fight. Life had taught her one rule: if battle is inevitable, strike first. It looked like this year's Sun Festival would give the crowd a show they would never forget. A ceremonial handshake closed the opening act, and the audience braced for the main events. The organizers wasted no time and launched straight into the first matches. The initial hunters entered the arena fighting like it was a championship decider, not a friendly exhibition. Everyone unleashed their strongest skills from the opening seconds. Combat techniques, magical assaults, and mana explosions filled the arena in a spectacular clash. Those who came craving blood and ruthless combat got exactly what they wanted. Gina looked tense. Dawn's early performance lacked confidence. Mr. Park, meanwhile, wore a faintly mocking smile, clearly sensing advantage. The tension between them had long outgrown simple rivalry. Park stepped outside briefly to catch fresh air and rethink his strategy. There, his closest aide awaited, a man who had long become Korea's deadliest assassin. He toyed with his dagger as if patiently waiting for a signal. All he wanted was Gina's death. One command would be enough. Park told him to stay calm and wait. The perfect moment would arrive when a hunter named Sol stepped onto the arena. Even during breaks between matches, the crowd never lost energy. Commentators passionately debated favorites and predicted upcoming duels. There were many strong participants, but Sol stood out clearly. Young, ambitious, and showing explosive progress lately, she had captured attention. She had not appeared publicly for some time, especially after rumors of an incident in the Red Wolf dungeon. Now everyone was talking about it, and the constant whispers were clearly getting under her skin. She had to endure constant rumors and whispers behind her back, noise that distracts from the main event and grinds on her nerves. Just like Shin, his younger sister kept circling back to the tension hanging between them. They barely talk. Her brother is colder than Darth Vader in family therapy. The moment Sol thinks about it again, heat rushes to her face and a storm inside urges her to say everything and tear him apart. But she had to focus because someone is already insisting on a meeting in the waiting room. For a second she panics, then assumes it must be her brother coming to support her before she steps out. Instead, it was Gina, still controlling every variable like a seasoned strategist. She wanted to make sure her promising hunters feel stable and nothing prevents them from delivering results. Gina did not hide that she knows about the family tension and sincerely offers help. A brother and sister should not bottle up resentment. Sometimes accepting someone with all their changes is necessary. Despite the gentle tone, Sol takes it as an intrusion into her private space. She coldly asks the guild leader to stay out of family matters and keep her distance. It feels like Gina is always nearby, subtly guiding people toward outcomes that benefit her. After all, Shin returned from Murim and almost immediately became a hunter working with Dawn, exactly as Gina envisioned. He should not have to risk his life again. In Sol's eyes, he had already fought enough endless battles. He could have chosen peace, lived as an ordinary man, and left the blood-soaked past behind. But those battles changed her once kind and cheerful brother into someone nearly unrecognizable. Emotions crash over her just as participants are called to the arena. Sol offers a brief apology for her outburst and strides toward the exit with sharp determination. Gina quietly adds that she once felt the same way and knows how heavy it can be. Shin walked through hell, surviving alone for years where death lurked every second. He could never return the same, and now he simply refuses to show his darker side to his sister. Sol says nothing, lowers her gaze, and walks down the long corridor, forcing herself to stay composed. Gina watches her leave until she hears a faint rustle behind her. Shin had been nearby the entire time, remaining in the shadows so he would not distract his sister before her match. Sometimes he seems more and more like Park Tae-hoon, who once was a different man too. Shin needs to admit that his younger sister is no longer the child he remembers. He cannot keep hiding his true intentions and thoughts forever. That distance will only grow. Gina steadies herself and calmly asks Shin to follow her. She intends to show the Supreme Sword Emperor a side of his sister he barely knows. A new endurance trial is announced and hunters immediately take their positions. The survival-style qualifiers among archers promise brutal tension. At a certain point, 6 teams from Dawn and Twilight will collide in a ruthless clash that could turn into a massacre. Mr. Park can hardly sit still, anticipating the climax. He has prepared something special and hopes Gina will appreciate his hidden move. The hints suggest Seoul is part of that scheme, leaving everyone wondering where this game will lead. Competing at this level requires not just strength, but constant use of modern tech. Communication earpieces are the bare minimum. Without them, controlling the battlefield is impossible. Even as the trial begins, Seoul struggles to focus, replaying the earlier conversation in her mind. It stings that her brother shared his fears with someone he has known only briefly. Irritation and hurt build inside her, clouding her judgment. Now she is determined to prove she has changed just as much as he has and can walk her own path. She also had to grow up too fast, lose parental support, and learn to survive alone. She is no longer the little girl who feared the dark and hid behind her brother. In that moment, she activates her sniper skill and radiates confidence. Her technique, fused with precisely focused mana, looks sharp and nearly flawless. A blazing shot cuts across the distance in a split second, leaving her opponent no time to react. Yet even a strong opening cannot fully silence the heavy memories in her head. Once she was just a child, hearing people whisper about her tragedy behind her back. A little girl who lost her entire family and was forced far too early to fight for her place in a merciless world. Even though every detail of the car crash was officially documented and the investigation long closed, no one truly believed her brother could still be alive. Only a stubborn little girl kept insisting he had not died. He had simply vanished, evaporated, and would return home one day. Then the goddess appeared, warning humanity that nightmare days were rushing closer with terrifying speed. Humanity had to evolve and grow stronger, or the entire planet would face total annihilation with no chance of salvation. At the time, her words sounded absurd, almost laughable, and most people refused to believe them. The revelation about monsters, hunters, and dungeons felt like a cruel prank or a mad fantasy. And the stranger and darker the world became, the more Seoul believed her brother would truly come back. But her teenage years were nothing like the carefree lives other kids enjoyed. She faced endless mockery, humiliation, and open ridicule from classmates. No one stood up for her, so she endured the insults in silence and stopped dreaming of real friends. She quickly understood that in this world, you either stand your ground or get crushed and forgotten. In that moment, the little girl changed forever, and there was no going back. The second someone tried to belittle her, she made it clear she would never play the victim again. Hardness slowly took root in her heart, and that path eventually led her into her first dungeon. Seoul constantly felt something missing. An adrenaline rush, real emotion, a true challenge. She began hunting monsters, and for the first time, felt a strange and almost frightening sense of freedom. It was hard to explain, but the sight of blood and danger brought her a twisted calm. Experienced hunters soon noticed her, unable to ignore the raw talent of the young girl. At first, they wanted to guide and protect her, but quickly realized she handled herself without pity or support. That was when Gina extended her hand and promised to help her build a true hunter career. From that day on, her training and her life changed beyond recognition. She started waking before dawn, took her studies seriously, and completely rebuilt her diet. The girl who had lost her family finally gained a purpose to move forward. Sometimes it seemed she trained day and night, forgetting rest and any sense of a normal life. Few understood that such brutal training was essential for her survival. It was the only way to avoid drowning in memories of her lost family. That lifestyle inevitably reshaped her character and worldview. She became colder, less cheerful, nearly stripped of her former kindness, as if childhood had been erased. Everything narrowed to one goal, proving she was not weak, and she succeeded. But now, the focus returns to the trial, because the younger sister of the protagonist is in serious trouble. Magical arrows flew from every direction, and one finally struck before she could evade. The deep wound forced her arm down, her heartbeat pounding from pain and adrenaline. Her opponents smelled blood and charged like starving predators. Using real arrows, they were convinced Seoul stood alone without support. They were the type who believed numbers alone guaranteed victory. Sometimes, though, they ran into hunters who survived alone and thrived under pressure. Seoul was exactly that type. Push her too hard, and she flipped into full berserker mode. Doubt vanished from her eyes. Her breathing steadied, and her hands moved on instinct, doing what they did best: killing. First, she had to break through the dense barrage of attacks and obstacles. Arrows came from all angles, and one mistake would mean death. With acrobatic agility and unbelievable flexibility, Seoul dodged and deflected strike after strike. She launched herself upward in a powerful leap, claiming the perfect position for a counterattack. Her magical arrow technique had saved her countless times in critical moments. Now, with the enemy holding numerical advantage, those skills became decisive. Hunters who believed themselves invincible were dragged back to brutal reality. 3 of them had just been taken down by a girl with a severely injured arm. Apparently, some snipers can deal devastating damage even in close quarters. Snipers usually camp at range, but Seoul dove into close combat, like telling Call of Duty campers to get out of the bushes. Marksmen come in different styles. Some dominate from distance and control zones. Others rely on speed and can slice you up point blank. And Seoul was the kind who never breaks when the fight gets tight. Watching Seoul now, it feels like she absorbed every strength of her class and pushed it to the absolute limit. She is flawless at long range, yet in close combat, she moves with shocking confidence and freedom. Her speed lets her close distance in a blink, and her natural flexibility allows her to dodge even the deadliest surprise attacks. Still, none of that matters without the core skill that defines a true sniper. Accuracy is king. If a sniper cannot hit the target, everything else is just decoration. One opponent thought dodging her first arrow meant an easy evening ahead, but that assumption became his fatal mistake. In duels like this, a single second of carelessness is enough to make even riding a will pointless. The victory was hard-earned, which made the taste of success burn even brighter. She soloed 4 pros like it was not a national tournament, but a ranked match against players named Noob. The noise drew reinforcements from Twilight's team rushing in. There were no allies nearby. The chaos of battle had scattered everyone, leaving Seoul suddenly without cover. That spelled trouble, because her stamina reserves were almost gone. While endurance held, she flowed from defense into counterattack effortlessly, but now her body began to betray her. She slowed noticeably and felt the critical moment approaching. In that instant, she remembered her brother's words about merging magic with martial arts. Magic was not just to be cast, it had to fuse with physical skill to create true advantage. She trusted her instincts completely and executed exactly as he once taught her. An unknown force wrapped around her body and deflected a magical arrow aimed straight at her heart. Confidence crushed doubt, and from that point, the outcome felt almost predetermined. One precise strike shattered her opponent's jaw in 3 places. It was a clean knockout that reignited hope for the Dawn Guild. Then came grim news. The rest of her team had already been eliminated. Waiting for backup was pointless. As always, she would rely only on herself. By merging magic and martial arts, Seoul felt a second wind awaken within her. She took down several more enemies and sealed victory for Dawn. Her stats surged instantly, and spectators practically lined up for autographs. A medical helicopter circled above the arena, ready to intervene at any moment. Inside sat her brother, watching closely and genuinely impressed by her growth. At that moment, he fully understood Seoul was no longer the little girl from his memories. She had grown into an independent and formidable woman worthy of respect. While one of Korea's strongest hunters celebrated success, another struggled to process what he had seen. Park had believed everything was calculated. Now he looked like a chess prodigy who forgot about checkmate in one move. He could not accept that martial arts and magic could be fused so seamlessly. Such mastery belonged only to the chosen few. Finally, a well-earned moment of rest followed the exhausting battle. Seoul glowed with happiness, openly celebrating her new skills and level up. Her brother acted unimpressed, though deep down pride filled him. Thanks to the martial arts she mastered, Seoul advanced to the finals and secured a clash with Korea's strongest hunters. She had achieved the impossible, the product of relentless effort and iron discipline. It was the perfect moment to say what had long been buried inside, and Shin took the risk. He admitted he had always seen her as a little sister and treated her like a child for far too long. Now he openly acknowledged the strong, grown woman standing before him. Shin revealed his true motive. He became a hunter for one purpose: to find the beings who destroyed their family. He believed that by reaching the highest level, he would gain answers, never noticing how deeply he immersed himself in this world. Seoul understood his drive perfectly, because the same pain lived inside her heart. Perhaps they shared one goal and one reason to fight, which meant they had to stand on the same side and let go of old resentment. It was time to leave negativity behind and move forward with heads held high. They could no longer hide things from each other. Real family is built on honesty. Those were the exact words Seoul had longed to hear, and it became clear the conflict was over. They promised to listen to one another, and never let small misunderstandings tear them apart again. After a brief rest, the crowd was informed that in 1 hour, the grand final battle of the festival would begin. Shin immediately wished his sister luck, quietly reminding her that the previous trial felt way too strange and suspicious. The opponents had acted like they were following a pre-approved script, aiming only at her and marking Seoul as the main target from the first second. Seoul had no doubt Twilight saw her as the most dangerous and highest priority threat in the tournament. But her brother saw deeper, sensing a calculated plot behind it, not just sports tactics. He could not forget the god of heavenly war's promise to one day strip away everything Shin held dear. Before the final, it was time to meet Mr. Jong, the man long regarded as Dawn Guild's vice president. After the former leader's death, one question naturally rose. Who would take the throne and lead the guild forward? Gina was the obvious favorite, and in the first weeks, effectively acted as the leader. But now she chose to focus on dungeon clears, handing bureaucracy and administration to her partner, Jong. He was calm and reliable, the kind of man you could count on when everything got heavy, and he would automatically become the competitor's main target, while Gina gained freedom to move more quietly and unseen. For her, staying in the shadows mattered. She intended to finish her bigger mission and turn Dawn into the nation's strongest guild. In the end, she wished the hunters luck and headed to the VIP box with the best view of the arena. Shin remained among the rookies who stared at him like a living comic book superhero. Those starry-eyed looks were starting to irritate him, and he wanted the spotlight gone as soon as possible. The moment he thought that, the waiting room doors suddenly swung open. In walked the last person anyone expected to see here, Mr. Park in the flesh. The atmosphere snapped instantly. Noise and lightness vanished, replaced by dense tension and a quiet sense of threat. Shin had long suspected the god of heavenly war might be working with Park somehow, guiding his moves. The guild leader played it off like a friendly meeting before an honorable match. He reminded everyone that the festival was about exchanging experience, not spilling blood in front of spectators. His words sounded warm, but behind the smile lurked a mask of cold hypocrisy. Shin saw men like this clearly, so he stayed alert, refusing to relax for even a heartbeat. Their first true meeting ended with a formal handshake that felt more like a hidden test of strength. Park looked mildly confused because his heavenly harmony sensed none of the familiar energy currents inside Shin. He had once believed Seoul's talent was simply a reflection of her brother's power, but now that assumption started to crack. For a moment, he looked almost as unsettled as his ever-present assistant standing off to the side. Before leaving, the Supreme Sword Emperor reminded him that in the Archer's battle, his sister had been placed in a suspiciously deadly position. If he ever saw her being hunted again with clear intent, the punishment would be immediate and merciless. After that, he promised to put on an unforgettable show, turned around and left without offering anyone a goodbye. While fans went insane waiting for the final, Shin kept his real objective in mind, erasing Twilight from the Hunter's political map. The final would be different because the main event always comes with maximum intensity. Both sides pretended it was just a friendly tournament, but everyone knew the stakes were far bigger. The great clash between Dawn and Twilight was about to begin. Even among fans, arguments and conflicts had already ignited because everyone was certain their guild would win. Dawn's side fielded a super rookie who had drawn massive attention in record time. He received a personal invitation from Gina, then cleared multiple brutal dungeons without taking a single injury. Rumors spread that this guy could become a new superstar thanks to his unique martial arts. The most intriguing part was that his full stats remained hidden from the public and analysts. That uncertainty weighed heavily on the opposition because they had no clue what to expect from Shin. Twilight's champion was a genius mage, famous for fiery charisma and an aggressive style. His name was Rugon, and whispers claimed he had not lost in over a year and a half. Shin was not bothered by the mage's confidence. On the arena floor, words meant nothing, skills meant everything. Twilight's leader had warned his fighters in advance. The final victory had to be not only certain, but spectacular. He directly ordered them to destroy the Supreme Sword Emperor in front of the roaring crowd. But the instant the referee signaled the start, Shin shot into the air, making it obvious he operated on a completely different level. Mr. Jong looked visibly anxious, glancing toward Gina to gauge her reaction. He hoped their top hunter had a real plan, even if from the outside it looked like pure improvisation. Shin had always preferred improvisation, even against the most dangerous and seasoned fighters. Today, he faced an experienced mage, meaning the very first exchange had to be calculated down to the smallest detail. If he unleashed his martial arts at full output, the mage would be torn apart in seconds. The crowd would not appreciate such a one-sided execution, so it was better to even the odds and stick strictly to hunter skills. Shin knew perfectly well that his true enemy was watching this duel with sharp attention. Disappointing, that man was not an option, which meant a few truly flashy techniques had to make an appearance. If the mage loved fire so much, then it was only fair to show him what blue flame was really capable of. The Supreme Sword Emperor moved first, forcing his opponent to activate a defensive barrier. Ryugan was used to dictating tempo and leading exchanges, but today he had to adjust. The moment he sensed an opening for a counterattack, he seized it without hesitation. He was never the timid type, and always preferred to grab initiative. When it came to mages, they too were divided into three primary classes. There were craftsmen who forged magical cubes and battle mages who specialized in close combat. The third caste was sorcerers, the embodiment of magic's pure concept. Sorcerers were closer to supernatural beings, wielding teleportation, flight, and spatial distortion in battle. They usually secured advantageous positions, supported allies, and only in extreme moments revealed their secret weapons. Ryugan belonged to the sorcerer class, and it defined his entire fighting style. In large-scale battles against monsters, sorcerers held key roles, empowering teams and coordinating assaults. But today was a classic one-on-one duel, where his usual tactics offered little comfort. Here, he would have to take risks, and risk meant exposing weaknesses. All Shin needed was a single mistake to capitalize on. He deliberately allowed himself to be targeted, carefully studying Ryugan's abilities. The mage deserved respect. His fire magic could melt even mithril armor. Without hesitation, he activated his signature skill, unleashing maximum destructive force. The front row spectators felt the heat wave crash over them. They had just witnessed the March of the Fire Dragon, the technique that made Ryugan one of Twilight's strongest mages. It was impressive, but not impressive enough for Shin. Massive dragon heads surged forward, aiming to rip him apart. Shin did not retreat. Instead, he stepped toward the incoming danger. With a single motion of his hand, he halted the attack, as if seizing the fire itself. From the outside, it looked like even the flames feared him and avoided contact. At that moment, the audience realized the Supreme Sword Emperor was far stronger than rumors suggested. The arena fell into dead silence. No one dared speak. Normally, an attack like that would end a match, yet Shin looked like things were only getting started. He had deflected the magic without even moving his feet, not a scratch marking his body. His aura existed on an entirely different plane, crushing pressure without flashy visuals. He snapped his fingers, and the flames dissolved, stunning even members of his own guild. Only Gina understood that it was not magic at all. It was raw power mistaken for a spell. Mr. Park struggled to contain his emotions, though outwardly he remained calm. Only up close could one sense the anger and rising hatred radiating from him. The stakes shifted instantly when it became clear the Fire Dragon March was powerless against Shin. The Twilight Mage refused to accept reality and prepared to attack again. Blinded by anger, his next move became predictable and overextended. Shin had already read his style and began genuinely enjoying the exchange. He blocked the first strike effortlessly and slipped past the second in a fraction of a second. Sometimes, he enjoyed fighting defensively, proving he was not only offense, but flawless protection. His flexibility and lightning-fast reflexes made him an impossible target. The instant his opponent lost balance, Shin answered with a precise and brutal counter. At times, even a simple finger flick was enough to send a powerful mage crashing into a hard knockdown. The crowd, once frozen in fear, now roared with laughter and excitement. It looked like a pro facing a streamer who downloaded the game yesterday and was already screaming about broken mechanics. Feeling the crowd's energy behind him, Shin began to toy with his opponent, turning the duel into a calculated exhibition of dominance. He even decided to toy with his opponent a little, give him a scare, even though there was no real need for it anymore. Ryugan snapped under the pressure and exploded, both figuratively and almost literally. He clenched every last drop of mana into his fist, ready to burn himself and everyone in the arena to ashes. He knew the truth all too well. Returning to his guild without first place meant getting crushed into dust. That brutal realization pushed him forward, forcing him into reckless extremes. Ryugan unleashed the March of the Fire Dragons once more, amplifying their fury and intensifying the blaze. To stop something like that, hunter skills alone would not cut it. Murim techniques had to come into play. A blinding flash swallowed the arena, leaving even the mage disoriented for a heartbeat. The heat was so savage that the barriers around the stands barely held. The Supreme Sword Emperor was cornered, and the tension doubled as everyone waited to see how this would end. Gina stiffened, and then genuine shock twisted across her face. Even an attack of that magnitude failed to break him. He kept smirking, forcing his opponent to waste the last of his strength on desperate, furious lunges. While his body remained in a formless state, he felt neither heat nor cold, and feared not even death itself. It was an advanced Zen technique, transcending form and limitation. Another wave of fiery dragons was completely neutralized and scattered into nothing. The audience erupted, chanting the Supreme Emperor's name at full volume. It looked unreal. Even the commentators admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. Ryugan had given everything, and now fully understood how defenseless he was before this power. If he once brushed off provocations, now he truly felt fear. In that moment, Shin resembled a battle-hardened wolf catching the scent of blood. He sensed the crowd craving a final crescendo, so it was time to close the show. The finale was intense and cinematic, but from the start, there had only been one true favorite. A devastating magical strike hurled the mage across the arena. The live broadcast ratings shattered every previous record. All of South Korea watched as Dawn crushed Twilight in real time. Park looked like a coach whose team just got humiliated in the Super Bowl, in front of millions. However, by regulation, one victory was not enough to claim the final. To seal his dominance, Shin would have to defeat one more opponent. The next fighter was known as the Spear, a man infamous for erasing Dawn's hunters from the arena. His record included numerous kills, earning him the nickname Death Knight. Shin had never lost to mages and had felt completely confident in the first match. But now, a warrior stepped forward, and that was an entirely different story. Even so, he remained calm and light on his feet, as if the battle had just begun. His confidence began to irritate the members of Twilight. The Death Knight boosted his stats and charged like a wild boar defending its den. His first sweeping strike was too fast for ordinary eyes, but not for the Supreme Sword Emperor. Shin dodged and immediately realized this opponent required a different approach. The warrior pressed relentlessly, forcing forward momentum, meaning Shin would have to accept his tempo. Refusing to stay defensive, Shin ignited Blue Flame and answered blow for blow. He became the first to willingly engage Death Knight in a raw close-quarters clash. Most opponents only defended and retreated until their barriers shattered. But Muram had taught Shin exactly how to deal with fighters like this. They could not be allowed to build momentum. Once Death Knight accelerated, stopping him would be nearly impossible. He had to be slowed with counter-strikes, even if it meant extreme risk. Unlike the mage, this warrior possessed raw, brutal power. At one point, Shin was forced into defense as the blows came too fast. His timing faltered, and his barrier cracked under pressure. The man who had just been entertaining the crowd suddenly found himself at a true disadvantage. That was the price of thinking you were the main character, only to realize you might just be the tutorial boss. On this arena, unleashing the full power of Muram was forbidden, so only basic hunter skills were allowed. To win under those restrictions, he would have to go all out while calculating every single move. The knight even started chuckling, sensing that the initiative was slowly locking into his hands. And just when it looked like Shin was slipping, he pulled his signature move again. Invisible pressure crashed down on the Death Knight like a furious lion claiming its prey. It felt like the crushing weight of the ocean abyss, where breathing and even moving becomes impossible. Mr. Park barely restrained himself from jumping into the arena to interfere personally. The Death Knight knew he could not disappoint his boss, forcing his body to move even as his muscles screamed in rebellion. Bit by bit, he broke free from the suffocating pressure and absorbed the attack into his own aura. Shin flinched as if his confidence had been running on a subscription that just got canceled. His gaze shifted for a split second, and the Death Knight caught the faint scent of doubt. If the opponent was that confident, then it was time to make him suffer with something different. Even though Shin had sworn to rely only on hunter skills, Muram instincts sometimes leaked into his movements. A tiny little cheat, subtle but effective. He became the first to pierce the Death Knight's defense in a direct frontal clash. Not only Twilight, but even Dawn's own members were stunned by the sudden turn. The commentators, usually screaming through epic moments, went completely silent again. And honestly, who could blame them? This was beyond anything standard. No one could pinpoint what techniques this guy was using. No hunter had ever seen anything like it. The Death Knight, once hailed as an unstoppable rider of the apocalypse, tasted the thought of defeat for the first time. Calmly, the Supreme Sword Emperor admitted that gravity had never been his true power. It was impulse control, attraction, and repulsion pushed to the absolute limit. With it, he could manipulate force vectors and momentum mid-fight, enough to lift a massive boulder and shatter any defensive barrier. The referee was ready to declare a winner, but the Death Knight suddenly withdrew his surrender. Rage consumed him, and he ignored broken bones and internal damage. All this time, he had been analyzing Shin's strengths and weaknesses, waiting for the right moment. He activated his true power, and a mocking smile spread across Park Tae-hoon's face. Park had clearly been waiting for this, baiting his opponents into a trap from the start. Now everyone would understand why the Knight was called the Mage Killer. If Shin, every eye in the arena locked onto the battlefield, sensing the decisive moment. Mouths went dry, hearts pounded, and breathing stalled in anticipation. The system disabled magic for 10 seconds, like a strict moderator banning you for one extra comment. He had been warned about this opponent long before stepping into the arena. In the moment of truth, he was told to use the counterspell without hesitation. It was not a move meant for show, but the guild leader demanded absolute victory. A sorcerer with attraction-based powers was considered too dangerous to leave alive. Replaying that warning in his head, the Death Knight swung for a fatal strike. Shin looked like a cat staring at a vacuum cleaner, all the swagger gone in a blink. Death loomed over him. But was that really enough to scare the Supreme Sword Emperor? If he had to conquer it again, he would do so without hesitation. The audience was too afraid to even whisper, terrified of missing a single movement. Dawn, already preparing to celebrate, suddenly stood on the edge of disaster. Gina could not believe her carefully crafted plan was collapsing in real time. In her mind, she begged Shin to retreat and not take the blow head-on. Right now, survival was everything, and relying on forbidden martial arts was not an option. But even with death staring him straight in the face, the Supreme Sword Emperor had no intention of bowing his head. He held a cold Grandmaster's pause, allowing the Death Knight to step within arm's reach. In the next instant, his eyes ignited with blue fire, and a dense martial aura wrapped around his body like unbreakable armor. The pressure spreading across the arena could not be mistaken for magic or ordinary mana. Never before had a hunter stood on this stage with such overwhelming inner power. Even in the VIP lounge, they felt it seep through their clothes and crawl across their skin like frost. A chill ran down Park Tae-hoon's spine, and for the first time that night, he realized victory was far from guaranteed. Even recalling Miram, he could not remember anything like this, and he watched the arena with sharpened focus. The Death Knight lunged forward, trying to ignore the crushing wave of force aimed straight at him. But suddenly his arms refused to obey, as if the counterspell had stopped working. He was lifted into the air like a puppet suspended before the final act of execution. And this was not magic. This was pure martial power forged in Miram. Even the one known as the Mage Killer stood helpless before this technique. The Supreme Sword Emperor gave a small nod, acknowledging his opponent's strength, and delivered quiet farewell words. This show had run long enough, and the ending was now inevitable. The chains tightened, and a lethal strike shot toward the knight's heart at terrifying speed. There was no defense left, only the acceptance of fate. Blood burst from his mouth, and the front rows heard the dry crack of ribs snapping. The vortex impulse hurled the Death Knight backward like a ragdoll. One final blow was needed to seal it, precise and absolute. Pure concentrated force crashed down and in a single moment reduced him to a charred silhouette. After that, the referee had no grounds to continue the match. The commentators still struggled to comprehend the nature of the power displayed. Some called him a genius sorcerer. Others whispered he was a dungeon monster wearing human skin. Either way, victory was his, and Twilight choked on its own defeat. After the fight, Shin declined further participation, claiming his mana was severely drained. In the remaining matches, Twilight fell 3-2, and the Sun Festival reached its end. Shin became a new star, while Twilight's reputation dropped like a rating drowning in a wave of dislikes. The guild leader locked himself in his office and stopped answering even his closest aide. He laughed nervously, like a GTA fan hearing about yet another delayed release. And yet, strangely enough, Park found advantages even in defeat. For years, he had lacked fear and the sting of open ridicule. This loss awakened a new motivation in him, and he honestly admitted that, for now, he could not defeat Shin. But he knew there was a path that could elevate him to another level of power. Right now, he intended to meet the Heavenly Warrior and receive a gift from the heavens. After the Sun Festival, another tense week passed. Dawn's headquarters descended into chaos from endless calls and emails. People were desperate to join martial arts classes and train personally under Shin, which was completely unrealistic. They had to explain repeatedly that the Supreme Sword Emperor was only an ally, not a mentor for hire. In just 1 week, over 300 calls and more than 800 emails had come in. Everyone wanted to know if Shin planned to open his own guild and gather talented hunters around him. Until now, every proposal except one had been instantly rejected. In the middle of a discussion, a loud knock slammed against the door as if the visitor had zero respect for manners. The chief secretary hurried out to handle the situation, leaving the two hunters alone. Gina calmly remarked that this was exactly how true superstars were born. Judging by Shin's expression, this kind of fame did not excite him at all. He wanted strength, not noise. Once they were alone, Gina seized the moment and quietly apologized. During the festival, Gina avoided revealing Shin's true identity and even suggested he concede, hoping to keep his real power under wraps. She underestimated the scale of his abilities and now felt awkward, like she had miscalculated at the most critical moment. Shin calmly told her to stop overthinking it, explaining that after Murim he no longer clung to trivial details. He never planned to use his martial arts in the first place, but the situation left him with zero options. Now, he was certain that Mr. Park would make his next move and attempt a comeback. A man like that could never be written off. People like him always return to rewrite history with their own pencil. Twilight Guild's public activity noticeably slowed down for a while. Rumors spread that their leader had locked himself inside his home and refused even to meet veteran hunters. That silence granted Dawn a strategic edge made possible only through the intervention of the Supreme Sword Emperor. On behalf of the entire guild, Gina thanked her friend and asked him to continue standing as Dawn's ally. Their cooperation benefited both sides, and walking away now would be short-sighted and foolish. Before Shin departed on his own matters, it was worth noting that he accepted only one offer out of many. He chose to collaborate with the Jeju Island Guild, a decision that confused many observers. Perhaps he was tired of capital dungeons and felt his growth beginning to stall. Jeju also offered something rare, a chance to breathe for a few days, away from the capital, cameras, and political schemes. The main character promised to return in about a month and asked Dawn not to do anything reckless. He trusted Gina completely, unaware of what would unfold during his absence. Had he known, he would never have brought his sister to Jeju Island. But at the time, it felt like the right move. Brother and sister were happy, and life regained its color. Seoul could barely contain her emotions. Her cheeks burned, her eyes sparkled like a kid before a holiday. Spending well-earned rest with her older brother felt like fate's personal gift. Yet the surprises were not over, because something unexpected happened at the airport. A representative of the Jeju Guild Union arrived with members of Tamra Guild and formally welcomed the new hero. It became clear the peaceful rest might be hijacked by an over-enthusiastic fan squad. Shin quietly told his sister to ignore everything and act like they knew no one. But the Jeju representative had no intention of letting the main star slip away. He was assigned to personally escort the Supreme Sword Emperor and not leave his side. After watching the Sun Festival, he had become a hardcore fan and dreamed of getting an autograph. First, they needed to go somewhere together. Details withheld. It was called an orientation tour of the island, so the guests could understand what awaited them. Amid all the commotion, Shin failed to notice a man with a radio closely tracking his every move. The spy spoke Chinese and reported that the target was fully under surveillance. He was in contact with Mr. Park, who had recently vanished from the public eye. His forced silence was over, and he was returning to his favorite game. He had been setting a trap for a long time, and now nothing would stop him from tasting sweet revenge. Meanwhile, back on Jeju Island, the hero was greeted with genuine excitement. Tamra Guild's leader, Mr. Kim Hogan, personally welcomed the new Korean star. He had heard plenty about the Supreme Sword Emperor and, like his subordinates, had become a fan. Understanding the road Shin had walked, he decided to offer a generous feast. Seoul was noticeably hungry and eagerly anticipated local delicacies. She imagined black pork or fresh rockfish, since Jeju was famous for its cuisine. Her stomach growled traitorously, and she had to restrain herself from attacking the table. Instead of meat, she was handed a tangerine, as if the chef had suddenly put everyone on a strict diet. That was definitely not what travelers expected after flying to an island paradise. For a split second, Seoul wanted to grab her weapon and confront whoever thought this was funny. In the end, she had to pretend the tangerine was exactly what she had dreamed about all day. Then the guild leader shifted to business and explained that his team solely controlled the island. They refused to depend on either Dawn or Twilight and aimed to preserve their independence. However, rumors claimed that the two strongest guilds in Korea were already eyeing the island, eager to seize control. Until recently, Tamra Guild had played a key role in governing Jeju, but now the situation was rapidly shifting. A massive wave of high-level dungeons had appeared out of nowhere, and many hunters flat out refused missions that insane. That was why the island needed a powerful figure, someone strong enough to lead and crush the rising threat. If the dungeons were not cleared in time, the government would allow outside guilds to seize control of the island. Mr. Kim was practically begging Shin to step in and save them from the approaching catastrophe. They were ready to pay any price just to drag themselves out of this abyss of despair. Shin was getting used to being called a savior, but even he did not expect this level of pressure. They looked at him like a superhero and promised him the island's treasures if he cleared every dungeon. By then, Shin realized he was facing people who had almost lost all hope. They had no plan B left and were ready to go all in, risking everything. His sister gently touched his hand and asked him not to rush into a decision. She reminded him that there was another urgent issue demanding immediate attention. The issue turned out to be simple. She was starving and wanted real food. They grabbed a bite, unaware that deep within the island a battle had already begun. The alarming news would reach them soon enough. Young members of Tamra Guild had set out on a routine raid and ran into serious trouble. Before them stood high-level fire venom monkeys that did not understand the word retreat. They attacked with magical flames, filling the air with thick toxic smoke. Defensive barriers cracked under the pressure and clearly would not hold forever. The hunter's poison spread across the ground, and a single touch could mean a slow, agonizing death. The rumors were true. These monkeys were far deadlier than they first appeared. Instead of attacking, the hunters were forced into defense, desperately searching for an escape route. With each passing minute, the situation worsened, and the end seemed inevitable. Just as another hunter leapt confidently across the treetops with effortless grace. It was the Supreme Sword Emperor, who had decided to stretch his legs after lunch. He calmly ordered everyone to hold formation and called for his sister, who had been hidden in the bushes. Together, they reinforced the perimeter and prepared to wipe out the pests quickly. Juan, the guild leader's assistant, decided it was time to prove his worth. His magical flash blinded the monsters and gave the team a window to counterattack. The hunters synchronized and moved as one unit. All that remained was to finish off the wounded monkeys and cleanse the forest of the infestation. He realized the local hunters were stronger than their reputation suggested. They handled magic and formation better than many rookies in the capital. If even they struggled, then the island's dungeons were truly dangerous. After clearing one zone, the group pushed deeper into the forest and encountered even more venomous monkeys. Juan proved himself genuinely talented, despite the slightly wild look in his eyes. His magic threw the monsters into confusion, leaving them panicked and disoriented. He eliminated several enemies in rapid succession without breaking a sweat. Yet he remained humble, acting like he was simply doing his job. At that moment, Shin considered inviting him to Seoul and offering a spot in Dawn Guild, but Juan would likely refuse as he dreamed of one day leading Tamra Guild himself. He openly spoke about his strengths and weaknesses, hiding nothing. Since childhood, he had trained to disperse magic over a wide area rather than concentrate it into a single point. After fully clearing the forest, the team decided to take a short break. This time, instead of tangerines, sushi and sweet drinks covered the table. Juan hovered near the island's main star, firing off endless questions. He wanted to understand how Shin fused martial arts with magic and close combat. Shin calmly shared the basic principles while his new fan absorbed every word. His sister clearly did not like this, perhaps because she felt a sting of jealousy over her brother's growing popularity. In truth, Juan was far from the careless fan he might seem at first glance. He memorized every word Shin said not out of idle curiosity, but because he dreamed of leading his guild one day and protecting everyone on the island. When he eventually hit the ceiling of his magical limits, he wanted to fuse that power with martial arts and ascend to an entirely different tier. Only through that kind of self-sacrifice and relentless self-improvement could a hunter earn genuine respect. Seoul immediately made it clear that the path of a leader was not paved with flowers and applause. It meant losing people, making brutal calls, and carrying the weight of others' lives, something only the truly strong could endure. Meanwhile, Shin decided to use the break to test his newest ability. He had recently unlocked the sovereignty technique, a presence so overwhelming that monsters sensed him as an apex predator. If directed properly, that technique could do more than intimidate beasts. It could bend them to his will. Shin chose to test the skill right there, though at first things went completely off script. Aggressive squirrels swarmed him like he had parked in their territory without permission. He took a deep breath, steadied his mind, and forced himself to think like a true ruler of monsters. Sovereignty consumed massive amounts of mana, making constant use impossible. But in a crisis, it could seize control of a single creature and turn chaos into advantage. At that moment, the Supreme Sword Emperor had more than enough energy for a full-scale experiment. He activated sovereignty and felt a wave of dominance spread across the island. Demonic creatures flinched, sensing an alien and hostile presence. Shin selected a target and focused on hijacking its mind. He commanded the monkey to gather its kin and lead them to their new master. Instantly, a searing pain pierced his skull as if it might split in two. For a second, he assumed the technique had failed, but then anxious rustling erupted from the bushes. That meant a massive horde of demonic monkeys was already on the move. With proper control, the island's cleansing could accelerate tenfold. Inexperienced hunters panicked, thinking a real earthquake had begun. Hearing the rising roar and shrieks, some even started praying, bracing for the worst. At first, a single monster stumbled out of the brush and collapsed face first into the dirt. For a heartbeat, it seemed the danger had passed. Then the tremors intensified, and crimson eyes flared from every direction as hundreds of enraged beasts emerged. Even the talented mage Huan faltered and shouted that retreat was the only option. Shin calmly ordered everyone to hold formation and withdraw in an organized manner. It became clear he intended to absorb the main assault and face the horde alone. The hunters obeyed without argument, while Seoul anxiously tried to grasp his plan. She saw the scale of the threat and could not bear the thought of leaving her brother surrounded by hundreds of monsters. But Huan followed orders too literally and physically pulled her away. He activated a spatial portal before she could even protest. In the next moment, only one man remained in the forest, the story's main character. Alone among the beasts, Shin felt a surge of exhilaration, the same rush he felt stepping onto the festival arena. He exhaled slowly and prepared to purge the island of this infestation by himself. Sovereignty was never meant for total domination. It was a tool to gather monsters in one place. Even he lacked the mana to fully subjugate such a colossal horde. When the battle erupted, even distant cliffs echoed with the tremors of blows and explosions. Watching from afar, Juan kept muttering that one day he would reach that level. Only Seoul remained visibly shaken, biting her lip in restless worry. Guilt gnawed at her for letting her brother face that nightmare alone. Juan tried to reassure her, reminding her that her brother ranked among the strongest hunters in Korea. He insisted Shin could handle any threat and that she simply needed to trust him. But Juan misunderstood her emotions. The root of her anxiety was something else entirely. Seoul worried more that her brother would gain too much experience and leave her far behind. Siblings always carry their own silent rivalries, so her reaction was only natural. She knew one thing for sure. A man who survived Murim for 140 years would not be scratched easily on Jeju Island. Meanwhile, Shin treated the battlefield like a personal training ground, methodically wiping out monsters one after another. He kept chaining skills, shifting attack rhythms, polishing every motion until it became pure instinct. Compared to the man who had just returned from Murim, this was a completely different tier of composure and control. He ordered the monsters to gather and form a circle around him, as if preparing them for a public execution. At that exact moment, Gina felt a sharp stab of intuition, like the atmosphere itself had shifted. A strange sense of danger washed over her, and for a split second she lost track of the conversation. Pulling herself together, she returned to business and ordered her assistant to read the full analytical report. According to the latest intel, Park Tae-hun remained inactive, along with the key figures of Twilight. As a result, analysts were already mocking Twilight as a dying worm, barely twitching and incapable of striking back. But Gina knew that kind of arrogance could cost them everything. A wounded lion is more dangerous than a healthy one because it has nothing left to lose. Until then, Gina had another crisis to handle. A high-risk dungeon had opened in the Taebaek Mountains, and the first squad had already failed the purge. Inside, the climate resembled a scorched desert, but the monster levels far exceeded the average. The first team had gone radio silent, which almost always meant the worst-case scenario. The next squad would need to account for extreme heat and relentless sandstorms inside the dungeon. And beyond the heat, proper gear was critical. Otherwise, the underground worms would turn the raid into a massacre. These creatures were the size of 10-story buildings and could detect even the slightest surface vibration. There weren't many of them, but each one could tear an elite unit apart in minutes. The intel was solid, and Gina was expected to make a decisive call before things spiraled. She proposed if Korea's top hunter were here, she would feel far more at ease. With him around, crises felt manageable. Without him, everything seemed fragile. Her nerves finally cracked, and she accidentally shattered a cup of hot tea. A small detail, but the sharp sound echoed the tension suffocating Dawn's headquarters. Meanwhile, battles had grown noticeably easier, and nearly every local hunter had leveled up. Shin trained them in new techniques, personally supervised raids, and corrected mistakes mid-fight. He fused sovereignty with the spirit of the sword, unlocking the early stages of telepathic coordination. Now he could draw monsters out and funnel them toward pre-positioned squads. Clearing dungeons became faster, and Shin felt like the server boss spawning mobs at will. The only issue, hunters began arguing over experience distribution. Hwan and Sul competed for leadership while rookies just tried not to die in the chaos. Sometimes Shin had to step in personally to shut down disputes and restore discipline. One decisive gesture from him was enough to put everyone back in line. Unlike his sister, Shin used this time not to compete but to sharpen himself. He refined between Sul. Even that downtime helped her recover and level up slightly, though she clearly overdid it with the soju. It tasted light going down, but a couple of shots were enough to turn legs to jelly. The schedule for new raids arrived, and Hwan began meticulously planning the next purge. Their next enemies would be were-rats, flying creatures with wolf-like faces. That meant a deep cave dungeon wrapped in total darkness. The guild's narrow tunnels and pitch-black corridors would minimize the advantages of archers and teleporters. Without tight tactics, control could collapse in minutes. This dungeon could become their final boss, the place where bravado ends and pain begins. Shin advised everyone to rest properly because the upcoming fight might drain them completely. When caves were mentioned, old memories resurfaced in his mind like a reopened wound. The commander of Samdado Guild, Mr. Jungkook, oversaw the raid's organization that day. He carefully explained the route, the risks, and every possible retreat point. Shin had hoped the conditions would be simpler, but there was no avoiding the cave. A heavy sense of unease tightened in his chest, and he resolved to finish this filthy job fast and return home as soon as possible. The local monsters turned out way more twisted and dangerous than anything they had faced in previous dungeons. Normally, they would spend weeks preparing for a single battle, waiting for the perfect opening before striking carefully. But now they had a man beside them who solo accelerated the entire process and left monsters with zero chances. Just a little further, and they would reach uncharted territory, the zone where things were guaranteed to get wild and deadly. Shin went pale, as if realizing this was not just a raid, but that same cursed level where he had once been humiliated with no retrieves and no save file. Even after all these years, memories of that cave still tightened his chest with an icy grip. The damp, claustrophobic space and the heavy scent of earth almost perfectly mirrored what he had felt in another world. Mr. Jungkook tried to offer support and stand beside the Supreme Sword Emperor. He probably should not have, because today Shin's mood was clearly dark and dangerous. The smartest move for everyone else was to stay out of his way. Then, this would end much faster. Shin was losing control over his emotions, and if distractions continued, even allies might feel the fallout. After several hours, the squad finally reached a deeper, unexplored section of the cave. Everything seemed on track, and each expedition member felt the dungeon was moments from total clearance. Then the calm shattered, replaced by a suffocating wave of anxiety. None of the ordinary hunters sensed anything unusual. Only the main character froze on instinct. He scanned the surroundings carefully, almost ignoring the strange symbols and hieroglyphs carved above. Lifting his gaze, he spotted an ancient marking that dealt no direct damage but could disorient and mislead anyone. Such symbols usually forced victims to wander in circles, turning a normal cave into an endless maze. But this time was different because the flow of energy was clearly guiding them toward a specific point in the depths. It felt like Murim energy, and now the only question was whether it was a trap or some twisted form of help. Shin wanted nothing to do with Murim anymore, and even the thought of it made his pulse spike. He inhaled deeply several times and reminded himself that those days were over, that this was a new era where he controlled his own fate. For now, leave him in that dark and dangerous cave and shift the scene to the sand dungeon. Massive, horrifying worms burst from the ground, hungry for fresh human prey. One hunter activated a Crusader skill and ordered his squad to tighten formation and hold the line. Every second cranked up the heat as the monsters grew angrier, hungrier, and more vicious. One of the worms triggered a burst of rage comparable to a Bloodstar technique. A crushing aura slammed into every living being within melee range, pressing down from all sides. The captain demanded unbreakable resolve and the will to stand until the very end. He deployed a defensive barrier to absorb the first wave and ease the pressure. The moment a counterattack window opened, he immediately ordered the strike. Young Jun-ho knew that in situations like this, trusting his partner Gina was the only move.
She leapt high into the air and delivered a precise, devastating blow straight into the monster's weak point.
That final strike erased the colossal worm that had stubbornly refused to drop for minutes. Sometimes, it felt like Gina could solo monsters of that scale without any backup. Jun-ho understood deep down that she would rather be fighting beside the Supreme Sword Emperor than sweating in this scorched desert. He cut off his own thoughts, knowing focus was everything right now. They had to speed up and clear the remaining monsters from the perimeter. The purge would have gone much faster if a few directors had not suddenly developed urgent business elsewhere. Meanwhile, near the entrance to the Sand Dungeon portal, the situation escalated so fast it felt like someone flipped a switch straight into war mode. Two armed hunters took their positions, ready to eliminate the guards without hesitation, executing their boss's criminal order like loyal attack dogs. The portal guards had no clue that within seconds their chill shift would turn into a blood-soaked incident. They were lazily chatting about the latest Hunter World drama until the secretary snapped at them to cut the noise and watch the perimeter. Usually nothing ever happened near dungeon gates, so the guild reps had grown comfortable and stopped expecting trouble. All the real action was inside the portal. Outside felt like paperwork duty for low-level staff. But the moment those overconfident words were spoken, the sky ripped open with flashes of violet light. The strike was so sudden that the inexperienced hunters did not even activate their defensive skills in time. After the first hit, the secretary staggered, blood spilling, slowly scanning the scene as the scale of disaster sank in. He recognized the archer technique meteor shower and almost immediately spotted a dark silhouette on the dusty road. The pieces formed a grim picture. This had Twilight written all over it. The illusion faded, revealing director Yoon Sung-min ahead, looking as if he had arrived to help. The secretary relaxed instantly, convinced everything was under control now that a Dawn director was present. He rushed to report the attack and directly accused Twilight of betrayal. His mind raced. Seal the portal, call reinforcements, evacuate survivors. But one split second of lost focus was enough for control to slip away entirely. Director Yoon Sung-min should not have known the exact location of this new portal, and his presence alone was a red flag. The traitor needed only one cold, precise strike to send the secretary into an early retirement. That is how insiders look until they rip off the mask like in Scooby-Doo and reveal just another rat underneath. Afterward, the director calmly pulled out his phone, called his master, and reported that the cleanup was complete. Mr. Park replied with barely hidden delight, saying he and his delegation were already on their way to begin Phase 2. His voice carried the joy of a man who had been assembling this plan piece by piece for months. Arriving on site, he surveyed the scene and almost smiled at the amount of spilled blood. The two directors, who had defected to his side, received restrained yet telling compliments. Gina and the entire Dawn leadership had no idea how deeply betrayal had rooted itself within their organization. People who had seemed loyal for years revealed themselves as wolves at the perfect moment and struck from behind. Park glanced at the portal and briefly remembered the days when he defended similar dungeons alongside Gina. Back then, he had just returned from Murim and was still learning how to be a hunter in this new world. Those days felt light and carefree in memory, though they had been soaked in danger and constant survival battles. That was when the first serious cracks formed between the two friends who had survived hell together. Park hated dragging weaklings along who slowed their growth and chained them down. He proposed they remain just the two of them, return to Murim fundamentals, and focus solely on personal power. His dream was to become the strongest hunter in the world, and he kept circling back to that vision. The Heavenly Warrior had already granted him Jade, and with that artifact, his martial power multiplied several times over. Park offered Gina a choice: follow the Heavenly Warrior and rise to the elite tier instead of staying stuck mid-table. Gina did not share his ambition and firmly asked him to stop. She understood his fears but reminded him they were no longer in Murim, where every day meant fighting to the death. She wanted to train young hunters, protect rookies, and build a system, not another meat grinder. She dreamed of leaving endless killing, bloodlust, and survival obsession behind. That was the moment their friendship developed its first deep fracture. Park had believed Gina was the only one who truly understood him, yet in that instant, he felt completely alone. After that, he was never the same and slowly drifted away from his former principles. The next monster invasion proved far deadlier and ended in tragedy. The rookies broke under pressure, and most fell in the very first clash. Swift, ruthless action had been necessary, or the situation would have spiraled beyond control. That was when the Heavenly Warrior contacted his subordinate again.
He ordered Park to forget the weak, grow stronger at any cost, and climb to the top of this world.
To achieve that, he had to unleash the Jade fully and cut off everything holding him back. Park was subtly told that even Gina could become ballast if she kept clinging to the weak. In that moment, he finally broke and chose to become the one who writes the rules instead of follows them. Like Thanos, just without the charisma or the gauntlet. Park developed a permanent hatred for weakness, and from that day, despised anyone who did not aim for the summit, branding them as dead weight. Pulling himself out of the memories, he strode toward the portal to personally initiate Phase 2 of his meticulously crafted plan. The two traitors hesitated, unsure how to proceed, until the seasoned assassin delivered clear and icy instructions. If even one member of Dawn attempted to leave the portal alive, they were to be eliminated without hesitation or questions. The order was so ruthless and absolute that even those backstabbing rats did not dare argue. Yet, Jilin had already begun to act, meaning that by Park's calculations, Shin would never escape the trap prepared for him. He knew the situation could shift in a heartbeat, and only trusted hands could guarantee success. The assassin had long vowed to kill that girl to wash away his failure and regain the boss's trust. Beside him stood two familiar faces, the Flame Mage and the Death Knight, both survivors of their recent humiliation. Under Park's command, they were certain that today, Dawn would cease to exist as a force. While the villains made their next move, Shin continued advancing through the damp, shadowed cave. He felt it clearly. Something was off, and the suffocating tension only intensified with each step. Suddenly, he turned to his allies and demanded an immediate explanation for what they were hiding. Hearing weak excuses, Shin stopped tolerating it and let a sliver of his aura seep out. He had won. If Mr. Jungkook wished to return home alive, he needed to stop playing vague games and start talking. The conversation was cut short when an alien icy voice echoed from deep within the cave. The moment they detected his movement, a sinister red glow ignited in the depths. It was no magic or illusion, just a classic bomb placed for maximum carnage. Shin's face showed neither panic nor surprise, as if he had already calculated this outcome. A faint smirk touched his lips as he branded them fools and calmly watched the flames devour the air. At that exact moment, far away, Gina felt a strange internal jolt. Anxiety crept in without reason, as though an invisible hand had brushed against her instincts. She blamed fatigue and the blazing sun, dismissing the warning. Returning to battle, Gina noticed movement from two massive worms nearby. That was where their rest point had recently been before she left for reconnaissance. The strike to the back was sudden and painfully precise. Dawn's second leader, Young Jun-ho, desperately tried to hold formation and keep the team from collapsing. But the enemies were too many, and he barely kept up with the avalanche of attacks. Assassin Chan Sung moved with terrifying speed, radiating the cold cruelty forged through years of killing. They did not call him the Hunter-Killer for nothing, though even that title did not guarantee victory. Jun-ho kept fighting without taking a single step back, even as blood ran down his armor. Only when his strength began to drain rapidly did he realize that against three professionals, odds were nearly zero. The irony was that he was almost lucky. The main villain still had not entered the fight personally. Mr. Park observed from the sidelines, savoring the scene with icy satisfaction. Jun-ho clenched his teeth, assessed the battlefield, and understood that today he likely would not return home. His resilience and technique deserved applause, even if none would come. Deep down, he still dreamed of seeing Twilight fall completely and forever. Seizing a brief pause, Jun-ho demanded to know how the enemy had breached portal security. Park coldly replied that the guards were no longer worth discussing. Almost nothing remained of them. If the enemy had entered the secret dungeon, then traitors had long infested Dawn. Yet even that revelation did not break the leader. He swore to fight until his final breath. He vowed to erase Twilight entirely, sounding like an anime villain yelling louder than he actually punches. If Jun-ho craved battle so badly, they would show him what it felt like to witness the weakness and collapse of his own allies. The people who entered the dungeon with him began falling one by one, and the formation collapsed faster than he could issue commands. As they died, they reached out to him for help, because no one walks into a raid thinking today is their last day. It all happened right before his eyes, and the weight of guilt slowly crushed him from the inside. Park, meanwhile, watched with a cold smirk, savoring the scene he had spent months engineering. He enjoyed seeing the enemy guild crack apart, losing fighters and confidence at the same time. Blinded by self-satisfaction, he failed to notice a real threat approaching from the eastern edge of the desert. Gina drew her dagger and dashed forward, intent on ending the ruthless bastard with her own hands. She was a step away from taking his head, but at the last second the assassin intercepted the strike and saved his boss. They had crossed paths before, but now there was no politeness left, no nostalgia, only intent to kill. Park smiled upon seeing his former friend and admitted with ironic warmth that he had missed her. They had once been close, and that was exactly why killing Gina had become an obsession for him. Yet her growth over the years made the task far harder than he had anticipated.
Even the confident Chan Sung-hyuk understood that breaking her defense would not be easy.
In the next instant, they clashed like two meteors colliding in the same orbit. Magic and martial arts intertwined in a savage exchange, instantly setting the tone of the duel. Explosions of light and sparks became mere background noise to a battle of wills. Neither side intended to hide behind defense. The fight turned fast and brutal. The assassin desperately wanted victory in front of his boss to prove his past failures were erased. But with that motivation came pressure, tightening his movements like invisible chains. He could not afford a single mistake, and that made his attacks too sharp and predictable. Gina coldly exploited his wide swings, reading them like an open book. Even so, she could not allow herself a second of relaxation. Behind her stood her friend, surrounded by enemies like prey encircled by hyenas. If she delayed even a few more minutes, he would die, and everything would lose meaning. To save him, she first had to break the assassin who refused to step back. But the root of this catastrophe stood just beyond the clash of blades. Park was the brain and backbone of Twilight, and as long as he lived, the threat would remain. That madman would not watch forever. Sooner or later, he would step into the fight himself. For now, he only observed, and to his surprise, he genuinely admired how much Gina had grown. In his imagination, she could become even stronger if she accepted the Heavenly Warrior's gift. Park felt relaxed, convinced that Shin had long perished beneath the collapsed cave. He believed a single explosion was enough to bury even someone who survived Miram's hell. That belief was fatal. An ordinary blast could never pierce Shin's defense. Not even a nuke would finish him. This was the kind of boss developers keep nerfing and still cannot delete. After the explosion, the Supreme Sword Emperor felt a surge of life, and that familiar thrill ignited in his eyes. The other hunters in the cave survived too, but they were far from fine. Their heads pounded, senses dulled, and no one understood what had just happened. Only Shin remained clear and composed as if he had already read the next chapter. His swift actions forced the enemies to reveal themselves prematurely, yet it still gave them no edge. Jungkook hurried to check if Shin was unharmed, trying to appear calm. A second later, unbearable pain pierced through his entire body. An invisible force lifted him into the air like a puppet on strings. He crashed to his knees, gasping and struggling to breathe. Above him stood a man whose eyes held no patience, only a demand for truth. The dungeon belonged to the Samdado Guild, meaning their leader had to know who planted the bomb. Setting explosives that deep would have taken days, and without inside help it was impossible. The guildmaster trembled violently, his face drained of color. Unable to withstand the pressure, he broke down in tears and swore he knew nothing. Had it not been for the Supreme Sword Emperor's instant reaction, the shockwave would have erased everyone. The hunters realized they were alive only because of him, and together they swore they had no part in the ambush. Shin gave him enough time to speak and confess on his own, but when all he heard were trembling excuses, he shifted into a ruthless predator. It was the first time the absolute subjugation skill was aimed at a living human instead of some dungeon monster. He knew the guild leader's mind could be completely shattered and erased, yet in this moment Shin felt zero guilt. He dragged Jungkook into the pitch-black abyss of his own consciousness and began flipping through his memories, layer by brutal layer. The truth surfaced fast. Samdado Guild had been secretly backed by Twilight from day one, operating under their protection. All this time, Samdado had been strengthening Twilight's grip over Jeju Island, acting as their quiet tool and cover. Everything stayed stable until a strange man in dark sunglasses walked into the guild office. He introduced himself as a death sentence and coldly declared he was acting under Mr. Park's direct orders. His name was Gao, and the aura radiating from him pressed against the chest so hard even veteran hunters instinctively looked away. The puzzle snapped into place, and the assassination attempt stopped being a mystery. It became disgustingly clear. The minor executors never saw the full picture. They were fed fragments of orders without understanding the real plan. Wasting energy on these pawns was pointless. The true source of the rot lay deeper. Shin closed his eyes and felt the dungeon as a whole, as if casting an invisible net across every inch of space.
The next second, a burst of mana ignited, and he attacked without the slightest warning.
The strike smashed into a massive pile of stone that blocked the path and looked like nothing more than rubble. The explosion was so violent, even hardened hunters nearly lost their hearing, despite covering their ears. The passage opened, and nothing now stood between them and escape from this cursed place. The hunters exhaled in relief, believing they had been spared and would be allowed to return home alive.
That relief was fatal. Shin was not the type to overlook betrayal. Every action demands payment, and the price of treason is always higher than it first appears. The Supreme Sword Emperor activated gravity, and with a single motion lifted enormous stone slabs into the air.
The rocks slowly closed in, forming an improvised tomb for those who betrayed his trust. Screams and groans echoed through the depths of the cave for a long time, but Shin never once looked back. He stared forward with icy resolve like a man who had just crushed parasites crawling at his feet. Gina was in serious trouble, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Even with the taste of blood on her lips, she held a confident smile. She believed in herself to the end, and even her opponent's advantage could not shake her core. With mocking calm, she reminded him that some rookie kid could never take her down. The assassin activated Phantom Skill and lunged forward alongside multiple copies of himself. That was exactly what she had been waiting for, coiled like a spider, patiently watching its prey. At the last instant, Gina unleashed the Dark King's poisonous kiss technique, and the trap snapped shut. For the first time, the assassin felt the lunar path of the Shadow King, and his steps lost their former confidence. His arrogance crumbled, while Gina seemed to bloom brighter in the heat of battle. Wiping out every enemy at once might be impossible, but saving her allies and breaking the encirclement was achievable. To do that, her swordsmanship ascended to a new level, and every phantom except the original was erased. The assassin charged forward and activated the Poison Spear skill. The technique was far more insidious than it first appeared. The poison targeted not flesh, but the opponent's weapon, corroding its very core. Gina's dagger, which had served her in hundreds of battles, began slowly dissolving under the toxin. One small mistake now meant death, without any chance of a comeback. Realizing the assassin had shifted his style, she instantly adapted to the new conditions. For victory, Gina was ready to switch weapons and abandon her usual tactics. Before the final phase of the fight, the assassin unexpectedly thanked his teacher. He admitted she had once shown him the path and helped him grow stronger. Gina coldly pretended not to remember those words and signaled it was time to finish what they started. The phantoms of the Shadow King's skill rose once more from the darkness, filling the space around them. A lot of people think a skill like that boosts a hunter tenfold, but the truth is way less flashy. Every phantom is built for distraction and mind games, not for landing lethal damage. Gina stepped in for the decisive strike, fully convinced she was targeting the real assassin. A sharp blade suddenly pierced through her guard and drove straight toward her heart without mercy. In that split second, memories of her first duel with Chon-sun flared before her eyes. Back then, Gina had mocked Twilight for recruiting weaklings who could barely hold a weapon right. He was just a scared kid feeling death's breath on his neck for the first time. Her dagger had stopped right at his throat, and his entire life flashed before him. Gina, without genuine hatred and killer resolve, no technique in the world would raise his level. When Twilight reinforcements arrived, Gina was already preparing to withdraw, leaving him one last piece of advice. She said she did not wish him dead, and seeing no natural talent, advised him to change his path. It would be better to start over and abandon the bloody road of an assassin. Years passed, and Chon-sun changed beyond recognition. Now, a crooked smile crept across his face. He had waited too long for this payback. But at the peak of his triumph, the battle twisted in an instant. Gina, who seemed a breath away from death, turned out to be a master-level actress. She reminded him she once told him to leave this path, and now he was paying for his stubborn pride. He should have this time. She had no intention of granting him another chance. The legendary assassin Chon-sun looked like he had been dragged back to the past, kneeling before her once more. His scream cracked into a plea, but Gina remained cold and unmoved. She too. When almost nothing remained of Twilight's chief aide, the air itself seemed lighter. The relief did not last. Mr. Park still stood nearby. He took his subordinate's defeat calmly, as if he had expected this outcome all along. The conflict between former friends had been smoldering for years, now ready to ignite into open flame. Those words only amused Park because real battles always start with loud promises.
They drew their weapons at the same time and activated their defensive barriers.
Now, meanwhile, Shin kept trying to reach his friend, but no answer ever came. Gina's phone was off, and anxiety slowly tightened around his heart. Soon, several hidden figures surrounded him, thinking they were predators and he was easy prey.
That was when the arrogant and smug Gao stepped out of the shadows, having waited patiently for this moment.
It turned out he too had come from Murim, though that detail had been carefully hidden. Shin always knew that simply surviving Murim did not automatically make someone a master.
Some reach the summit in a few years, while others spend decades there and stay mediocre.
Only relentless training and an insatiable hunger for growth turn ordinary people into true warriors. And right now, it would become crystal clear which of them deserved to be called a real warrior of Murim. Gao quickly realized the rumors were no exaggeration. His opponent controlled magic on a terrifying level, like he was breathing it instead of air. Fusing martial arts with magic was still considered a freak-level gift, almost an anomaly, but Gao believed he had cooked up a proper counter for that kind of power. He activated a complex spell, and the space around them drowned in a dense yellow glow, as if the sky itself had dropped underground. With his experience, Shin instantly understood he had stepped into a refined gravity trap where every move would cost double the effort. He had faced similar magic before, but those were cheap knockoffs. This time, he could feel the hand of a real master.
Gao proudly declared the technique the greatest creation of the gods, having woven gravity together with Murim principles into a single system.
Now it was time to see whether that hype hid real skill or just nicely packaged fairy tales.
On top of the trap, Gao had allies positioned around the perimeter, waiting for the signal to jump in.
The setup was nasty, almost checkmate tier, but Shin had never been the type to fold under pressure. The tighter the enemy circle closed around him, the calmer his gaze became, and the sharper his movements. Clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white, he lunged forward, unleashing pure martial force without a trace of magic. He intended to win barehanded, just like in the old days when every motion was carved from blood and sweat. But his very first strike slammed into dense internal energy, like punching an invisible wall. That single clash was enough to confirm this would not be a casual walk. Underestimating them would cost heavy. A moment earlier, he had believed a few precise blows would end it.
Now he had to pivot instantly, slide into defense, and keep his composure like it was all part of the script.
He studied his opponents carefully, struggling to believe their preparation had reached this level. Had each of them truly passed through Murim and trained for years just to face him? The second, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. They caught it immediately. A heavenly golden seal slowly ignited beneath his feet, draining his life force bit by bit. That was why he could not unleash his full potential. He could feel his strength slipping through his fingers. The cruel twist was that the seal did not just weaken him, it funneled the stolen energy back to its creator. That meant Gao and his allies were getting stronger every second while the Supreme Sword Emperor gradually weakened.
In that position, dragging out the fight was basically suicide. If he wanted to win, he had to crank up the tempo and push beyond his limits.
A seal like this was built through natural anchors placed in exact positions like pieces on a massive chessboard.
It was called the True Law, a space within space where the rules themselves were rewritten. In Murim, there once lived a legendary strategist and formation master named Liang Ju.
He controlled wind and lightning through octagonal formations and could wipe out an army without drawing his blade. People compared him to a god, and Gao had admired his methods since youth.
Even after returning from Murim, Gao kept refining formation arts, pushing them to the extreme.
After a few successful experiments, he already called himself a god. Classic Elon Musk syndrome energy. He truly believed nothing in the galaxy could rival his control over spatial laws. His arrogance swelled so hard it felt like fate itself was lining up to teach him a brutal lesson. Shin suddenly accelerated, proving that even while leaking energy, his body could move faster than before. It felt as if he was ignoring the seal's pressure and rewriting the rhythm of gravity around him. Skills that had been chained by restrictions began to break free one by one. The Supreme Sword Emperor felt the thrill return and realized the real fight was only just starting.
He created his own counter law, an invisible crack in the structure of the formation no one else could see.
From the outside, it looked impossible. Gao did not even notice his perfect seal had begun to glitch. The fighters surrounding Shin no longer felt like predators cornering prey. In a heartbeat, they understood the truth. The real apex beast was standing right in front of them. Shin fully grasped that these were not opponents worthy of true fear, despite their movements felt rough. their techniques incomplete, their execution like a budget imitation. Most importantly, the harmony of pure martial art did not resonate with them, and that kind of resonance cannot be faked. Shin was right, and Gao could no longer hide the truth. He admitted his aides were artificially created fighters, mere imitations of genuine power.
If they had been real masters, Shin would have sensed the difference instantly.
Gao built his squad out of corpses, literally held auditions like the worst season of The Walking Dead. He personally slaughtered dozens of hunters just to harvest the right ingredients, with matching potential and compatible energy signatures. His research moved at a terrifying pace, and in the end he forged obedient slaves whose power rivaled high-rank adventurers. The guy looked insane, but underestimating his formation would be a fatal misplay. So Shin decided to squeeze every ounce of value from the situation.
Anyone who sacrifices people for power leaves no room for doubt. Someone like that earns only one sentence: death.
Once that, Gao's body twisted in agony as if invisible pressure were shredding his organs from the inside.
The Supreme Sword Emperor felt zero compassion. Instead, a cold desire to end it in blood flickered in his eyes.
Fights like this refreshed him in a strange way. He did not call it murder, he called it demon hunting. Gao quickly lost control over his perfectly scripted battlefield and scrambled to fix the collapse. He ordered his creations to merge into a unified assault and eliminate the primary target at any cost. They did not even realize they were the ones trapped now, sealed inside a cage with no exit. One touch of Shin's hand against the ground was enough for the yellow formation to start dissolving under waves of blue flame. The summoned demons felt pain like being submerged in molten lava without the mercy of a quick death. Shin remained razor-focused, observing the destruction like a surgeon finishing a precise operation. He watched the blue fire melt the golden structure, and with every crack his confidence surged.
Victory.
Shin shifted the balance of his own energy, suppressing gold and rewriting the elemental equation itself. Muram had flooded him with too much knowledge for such constructs to feel anything but primitive. He could have won with his eyes closed. Any further resistance would only be pathetic agony. Gao collapsed to his knees, choking on fear, begging for mercy. Now came the real decision. What to do with this slug, whose twisted talent was still undeniably rare? He could be used, repurposed, turned into a tool, but alliances like that always reek of betrayal. Far simpler to absorb all his energy, the same power he had stolen from others for years. The absolute command skill could drain him effortlessly, like a sponge soaking up the last drop of water. And with it, but truth cuts deeper than any blade, and not everyone is ready to bleed for it. Meanwhile, Gina fought desperately, yet her opponent outmatched her in raw power. She had always walked alone, both in Muram and on Earth, relying on no one but herself. And yet once, she met someone who seemed like a dependable friend with a massive future ahead. They reminisced about hellish days in Muram's caves and held each other up when the world felt like it was collapsing. From the outside, they looked like siblings who could never be torn apart. Now those memories felt like scenes from another universe, fragments of a life that no longer existed. It became painfully clear that their meeting had been a fatal mistake, one both regretted in different ways. Park coldly ordered her to stand if she did not want to die pathetically and without glory. With the last scraps of strength, Gina pushed herself off the ground, though her movements resembled a zombie running on fumes. Most of her power had drained away during the clash with the assassin, but she refused to show weakness. Clenching her will tight, she activated the Shadow King technique once more. But exhaustion made her patterns predictable, easier to read than before. Park calmly activated his defense, and the moment their forces collided, her mana exploded back in a violent recoil. The impact hurled her backward, though she narrowly avoided fatal damage. Through the chaos of battle, she heard the mocking laughter of her former friend offering surrender. After using Shadow Play, she had almost no hidden trump cards left. She had burned everything, while her opponent did not even look winded. The first time they met, he had been weak. Now he puffed up like a blogger after hitting 1 million subs. Clearly, the alliance with the Heavenly Warrior had launched Park toward heights he once could only fantasize about. Before fading into nothing, Gina chose to ask one final question to erase her doubts. She returned to the day everything spiraled out of control and demanded the truth. She demanded to know why her clan members had been dying one after another while she was fighting monsters. Deep down, she already knew the answer, but she still wanted to hear it straight from Park himself. No dodging, no lies. He reacted exactly like before, trying to switch the topic, avert his gaze, and pretend the question had never existed. His face betrayed him. The memory clearly unsettled him because that truth would wound Gina far deeper than any blade. But this time, she was not letting him slip away. She had carried this weight for far too long. Cornered and stripped of his usual excuses, Park finally stopped resisting. He stated coldly that the weak die. That is the law of the jungle. Nothing surprising about it. Strangely, that brutal answer made her smile faintly, as if her last doubts had finally evaporated.
After that, there was no hesitation. The final strike would land like the IRS after a missed deadline.
Her resolve crystallized completely, and her blade no longer trembled even a fraction. The defensive barrier that had repelled attacks for years was pierced, but at the final instant, a long sword slid between them and saved the bastard. Their clash felt like two natural disasters colliding, and reality itself seemed to ripple for a heartbeat. The shockwave was so violent that even the underground worms refused to surface, fearing they would be crushed instantly. How it ended remains unclear for now because we need to return to the main character. He still cannot reach his friend, and that heavy sense of dread is slowly corroding him from the inside. Gao was forced to spill every detail of the truth just to be left in peace. Drained of the energy he had hoarded, he changed not only internally, his body withered and his eyes lost their light. Shin learned that Twilight serves the Heavenly Warrior and is preparing to strike at the worst possible moment. The problem was that Gina and her team were too far away beyond normal reach. Running there was not an option. It would take at least half a day, and he did not have that kind of time.
Only one path remains, the long-distance transportation technique for magical objects.
Juan had explained the basics, but theory and real execution over that distance are two completely different beasts. The slightest mistake could tear his body apart and scatter him into cosmic dust without a trace. Before committing, he must weigh every step and accept the possible consequences. After all, Gina and Shin are technically just business partners who have known each other for barely half a year. Is she worth risking his life for? Or would it be easier to turn away and sip a cold cocktail on the beach? The moment that thought crossed his mind, her silhouette flashed before his eyes. The memory of her asking him out made his heart twitch, as if he were not a hardened warrior, but a confused high school kid. Images of the past ignited one after another, tying their fates together with an invisible thread. Gina had always relied on him and did everything to make him feel at ease by her side. After everything they endured, could he really forget her without a shred of regret? The Supreme Sword Emperor laughed, realizing he was almost losing his mind to inner conflict. He rolled his shoulders and neck. No more waiting, the decision was made. Once he believed protecting his younger sister was the only priority, but now he understood it was more complicated. Somewhere along the way, another name had quietly been added to the list of those he must protect. The brief warm-up ended in a flare of anger and a sharp surge of energy. Gina only needs to hold out a little longer. Help is already racing toward her. Now, we shift to the city of Taipei, where the air remains damp and cool. Two filthy rats who betrayed their guild have no idea that retribution is already storming toward them at hurricane speed. They rest calmly, enjoying the moment as if nothing ever happened. The traders believe switching to Twilight and tripling their salary was a genius move. For them, betraying friends is just another way to cash out bigger. And yet, they cannot shake thoughts of that madman surrounded by disturbing rumors. Each of them feels uneasy, as if deep down they sense disaster closing in. They say the lunatic is long dead. Exactly the kind of line spoken in horror movies right before the lights cut out. Just as they fully relaxed, a strange sound echoed from the forest and shattered the silence.
The confident men from seconds ago turned into frightened kittens, losing all control of the situation.
They jerked their heads around, scanning the darkness, trying to locate the source of the threat. The air grew heavy, movement stiff, and their mouths dried from sudden fear. It meant only one thing. The Supreme Sword Emperor was already near, and his aura was slowly crushing the space itself. The moment he reaches out his hand, those sewer rats will be flattened without a single chance at survival. The moment they sensed his presence, the space itself seemed to compress, and it became obvious. Running was pointless. There was nowhere left to escape. A dry crack of bones and a heavy thud against the ground echoed through the area. The swift and merciless judgment of traitors had been delivered. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, the heat was still unbearable, as if the desert itself had decided to join the fight as a third combatant.
In the burning sands, two titans clashed again and again, each trying to prove who truly deserved the title of strongest.
Gina finally unleashed her most devastating strike, pouring into it the last of her mana and pride. But even that was not enough.
Park had grown too powerful to be broken by old tricks and familiar techniques. The Heavenly Warrior had generously granted him new abilities and an expanded mana pool, turning him into a walking war machine. Now, the guild leader could fight even without his legendary blade, relying purely on his reinforced body and amplified aura. He seized his opponent and hurled her into a massive boulder with monstrous force, aiming to shatter both bones and will in a single blow. The impact was brutal and deafening, and for a heartbeat, the air itself froze before the battle resumed. There was no time to recover, and the situation rapidly spiraled toward a critical breaking point. Seeing that Gina had nearly exhausted herself, Park felt a flicker of disappointment, as if he had expected more from her. He had hoped for true resistance, yet not a single scratch marked his body. So he began boasting again, reminding her how profitable it was to serve the Heavenly Warrior. He offered her one final chance to join him and gain the kind of power she once could only dream about. Gina paused briefly, steadied her breathing, and calmly thanked him for such a generous offer. Then she made it clear she would rather die than stand beside a slimy leech like him. That answer alone was enough to make her former friend tremble with rage. He looked at her like a stubborn child who supposedly failed to grasp the true balance of power in this world. Gina declared firmly that Twilight would never fulfill its plans because it would fall at the hands of the strongest hunter alive. She was speaking of the man the world knows as the Supreme Sword Emperor. Shin had long been hunting the Heavenly Warrior and was simply waiting for the perfect moment to make him suffer. And of course, he would not leave a single servant of that madman alive. Park might laugh now, but sooner or later, Shin would wipe that foolish grin off his face. While others believed Shin was dead, Gina stubbornly held on to the opposite belief. Her faith paid off. Against the blinding sun, she saw a familiar silhouette. Park was still explaining how meticulously he had crafted his plan and how he had supposedly killed Shin. Listening to that self-satisfied nonsense was almost amusing, knowing the plan had already collapsed. When he heard a familiar voice behind him, Park assumed for a split second it was an illusion or a trick of his mind. But standing there was the Supreme Sword Emperor, whole, unharmed, and more dangerous than ever. Not only had he survived, he had returned in time, casually dealing with 2 filthy rats along the way. For him, it had been little more than a warm-up, and now he intended to continue with another fight. Gina looked into his eyes and for the first time in a long while felt that the worst might finally be over. But when Shin saw her wounds and the blood on her face, his smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. He had already defeated the dangerous warrior named Gao and crossed hundreds of miles in just 40 minutes. After a journey like that, it would be absurd to stop now and leave the main source of all this chaos standing. The guild boss still hoped his special skill and calculated mind would somehow salvage the situation. Now, he would have to face a man who had mastered the fusion of magic and martial arts into a single seamless force. The air cracked violently, and it became clear the red barrier would not survive the mounting pressure. It felt as though the heavens themselves were backing him, because his technique was unlike anything this world had ever witnessed. All that remained was to unleash that power and restore the broken balance. Even in the face of death, the Shaken boss refused to surrender without a fight. He summoned his sword and poured into it everything he had left, desperate to turn the tide. Their clash erupted on a cosmic scale like 2 stars colliding in open space. Compared to this, every previous battle looked like rookie training drills. This was true elite tier, where each fighter was worth an army. Park had trained in Murim and then sharpened his talents relentlessly on Earth, never stopping for a single day. His contract with the Heavenly Warrior granted him power beyond the reach of most hunters. But Shin was the only one who did not just train in Murim, he survived it and reached the absolute limit of human mastery. He could rightfully be called chosen. Only a handful in history have ever touched a skill like 100 Descending Dragons, and Shin stands among them. Judging by the boss's stunned expression, he did not even grasp the laws behind this technique or why the space around them was warping. Shin slowed his breathing, cleared his mind, and let his inner power rise to the surface without rush or noise. Celestial dragons were already locked onto their target, and no barrier in existence could halt their descent. The red energy dissolved as if it had never existed, while blue flames spread gently yet relentlessly across the battlefield. Realizing how exposed he truly was, Park chose a desperate gamble, fully aware it was his final card. He slammed his blade into the ground, pouring every last drop of mana into that strike. The explosion turned the desert into a furnace, the air so scorching it felt impossible to breathe. As the smoke slowly began to clear, a shaken Gina heard a familiar voice cutting through the chaos. By her side stood her ally Jun-ho, wounded but alive, which in itself felt like a miracle. She rushed to him instantly, helped him up, and hurriedly checked his injuries. Through clenched teeth, he admitted he had failed to save the others, and that guilt weighed heavier than any wound. He was the sole survivor, yet even that did not mean victory was within reach. As long as Park was not buried for good, there could be no relaxation, not even for a second. He still had two of his strongest hunters ready to throw their lives away on command. The Fire Mage and the Death Knight exchanged tense glances, unsure how to proceed. Then calm, confident footsteps echoed, the steps of someone who by all calculations should have been dead. The shockwave could have erased an elite squad, yet he walked through it without taking a single step back. He had not merely survived. His stride made it clear that explosions like that were just warm-ups. The boss completely lost his composure and ordered his subordinates to eliminate Shin immediately. It was as if he had forgotten that Shin had already defeated them before without assistance. They were hardly eager to relive the humiliation and terror of that encounter. For a split second, fear of death drowned out their loyalty, and doubt flickered in their eyes. But realizing there was no retreat left, they activated their strongest abilities. Shin now had to face them both at once, yet he always kept an ace hidden. During the Sun Festival, he had deliberately restrained his Murim techniques and fought only as a regular hunter. There was no reason to hold back now. The time had come to reveal his true ceiling. Gina and Jun-ho, despite their injuries, charged forward to support their friend. They did not wait for permission. They simply could not stand aside. Soon it became clear their help was unnecessary. Shin had already handled it. By fusing magic and martial arts, he barely felt any resistance. Taking down two elite hunters in mere minutes was a masterclass. The appetizer was decent, and now the Supreme Sword Emperor was ready for the main course. Park had not yet recovered, and his restless, darting eyes gave him away. He was waiting for a miracle like a student hoping the exam gets canceled by a fire alarm. His trembling hand could not firmly grip the sword's hilt. Not surprising, considering the man before him radiated an aura that could intimidate even the dead. At that critical moment, the Heavenly Warrior finally reached out to his disciple. Awakened from a long slumber, he promised to make Park stronger than ever before. In return, Park had to fight until his final breath and unleash every ounce of potential. An unknown force seeped into his soul, and the balance of power shifted instantly. The frightened hunter transformed into a vessel overflowing with destructive energy. With that reinforcement, he no longer doubted his victory. The Supreme Sword Emperor only smirked and accepted the challenge without hesitation. The harsher the battlefield, the stronger his hunger for triumph. He had always lived by that code. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Warrior watched with keen interest, savoring the coming climax. He was curious to witness the limit of the man bold enough to challenge him. Basic techniques faded into irrelevance. This was now a war of higher realms. To win here demanded supreme-tier magic and flawless mastery. Empowered by his mentor, Park became unrecognizable, his aura heavy and oppressive, like a storm about to swallow the desert whole. He stopped defending and advanced openly, crushing forward with raw force, leaving no room for doubt. A closer look revealed the true source of that power. A necklace with a jade crystal, pulsing with a strange inner glow. Destroy that crystal, and most of the foreign energy might leave the guild boss's body, reducing him to nothing more than an ordinary man. Shin did not rush. He allowed his opponent to close the distance, studying every subtle movement like a predator analyzing prey. Only at the final second did he slowly draw his blade, deciding the bare-knuckle experiment was over. Until now, he had deliberately given them an edge, fighting in a brutal boxing style like it was a ring match, not a death duel. That phase was done. This finale demanded something far more serious. Drowning in his own overflowing energy, Park lunged and unleashed a devastating first strike. He had been allowed to attack first and truly believed he could end everything in one swing. A naive mistake, because the Supreme Sword Emperor's barrier operated on a completely different understanding of power. It did not just withstand the blow, it shattered the blade, a weapon revered as a legendary relic from the Qin dynasty. Losing your weapon at a decisive moment is practically a death sentence. Any Murim veteran knows that. The jade began to dim, like a cheap power bank promising 100% and dying 5 minutes later. From that instant, the outcome became obvious, even to those still praying for a miracle. The beginning had looked epic and grand, but the ending felt like a sequel overhyped and underdelivered. Noise without revolution. Shin stepped forward, grabbed his enemy by the throat, and stared coldly into his fading eyes. He could feel the heavenly warrior watching and wanted to display the absolute peak, to make that mad god taste fear. Absolute control allowed not only suppression but extraction of hidden truths. It was time to learn who the heavenly warrior truly was, and where this self-proclaimed god had crawled from. Gasping for air, Park confessed that the heavenly warrior sent people to Murim for his own amusement, which meant Shin had unknowingly been chasing the true puppet master all along. The moment those words were spoken, chains materialized from the void and bound the wounded Park. In that same second, identical shackles wrapped around the Supreme Sword Emperor, freezing him in place. The world darkened, and when Shin opened his eyes, he stood inside a damp, freezing cave. Absolute darkness surrounded him, his arms chained to cold slabs of stone. Escape felt nearly impossible, and the scene mirrored that cursed Murim cave with painful accuracy. Goosebumps ran across his skin, and panic stirred inside, a feeling he believed long buried. He refused to believe he had returned until a familiar voice echoed from the shadows. Across from him sat Park, unchained, unharmed, calm. But it was only a shell. The heavenly warrior himself was speaking through Park's body as a vessel. He had entered his disciple's mind to personally meet the man now whispered about everywhere. The entire space was crafted by a soul sword technique. Brute strength alone could not break these chains. The heavenly warrior urged him to relax, breathe, and stop resisting the inevitable. He promised answers to any question, claiming time itself did not exist within this dimension. Shin remained silent, sinking into heavy memories. He had never accepted that throwing a human into another world was some acceptable game. Even after years, remembering 140 years in a realm of endless slaughter still burned. All that time, he did not know whether his family lived or died, suffering every second. Instead of growing beside loved ones, he became a machine built for survival. Those 140 years were soaked in blood and disappointment, while the heavenly warrior laughed as if observing a successful experiment. To him, everything was mere entertainment, a cure for immortal boredom. He had waited patiently, even when it seemed Shin might break completely. All that waiting had one goal: to witness the Supreme Sword Emperor reach his limit. And now, seeing his strength, the heavenly warrior genuinely wondered why Shin still clung to humanity. After such suffering, should he not have cast aside his human nature? Hearing that empty philosophy, Shin burst into laughter in his tormentor's face. He had no interest in dissecting the ramblings of a blood-hungry psychopath. He had only one regret, and that regret would fuel his vengeance. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: the heavenly warrior had destroyed his life, and that crime would never be forgiven. In the next heartbeat, power ignited within him like an answer to his rage, and the dark chains of that other world began to crack under the pressure of his will. The next strike detonated like judgment itself, shredding the illusion into fragments and hurling both hunters back into reality. No chains, no cursed cave, just the brutal now. Park heard the sickening crack of his ribs and felt something burst deep inside, and a second later, blood poured from his mouth in a heavy burning stream. The jade crystal that carried the heavenly warrior's power could not handle the overload and exploded into dozens of glittering shards. The smug confidence vanished completely. Before Shin now stood a broken man. All the heavenly warrior could rely on at this point was pathetic telekinesis and the ability to speak through borrowed bodies without appearing himself. He ordered Shin to listen, to open the door to ascension, abandon humanity, and rise beyond flesh. If he refused, he would soon lose everything he held dear. That was the threat. The meaning was hard to grasp, yet beneath the words lay a cold undertone, as if the plan was already in motion. Gina tried to calm him down, but he looked like a powder keg that had just met a spark. Something shifted inside his soul, as if he glimpsed a crack in reality itself, something others still could not see. By the next day, news of what happened had spread across Korea faster than any official statement. The Twilight Guild learned of their boss's death, and with him collapsed the influence built almost entirely on his strength. They declared full capitulation. Park had not just been a leader, but their ideological spine and primary weapon. Most high-ranking Twilight hunters had died in the desert dungeon, leaving the organization practically fangless. The survivors scattered with their tails tucked like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Some even rushed to join Dawn, unwilling to remain jobless and unprotected in such unstable times.
Dawn's chief secretary miraculously survived what should have been a fatal wound, shocking even the doctors. Dongwan sustained himself with healing magic until the last second, holding on just long enough for rescue. The question of integrating the two great guilds resolved itself. There was a clear victor, and the transition moved faster than analysts predicted. In 10 minutes, a press conference would officially announce the new balance of power. Gina stepped back once more, stating she preferred remaining vice leader and avoiding media spotlight. She preferred sitting with tea, speaking quietly with the man who arrived when everything nearly fell apart. A faint déjà vu lingered. They had once sat like this before after another battle, sharing awkward gratitude. Now the nation felt more stable. Korea was no longer divided between two titanic guilds. Peace, at least for now, but that never meant safety. Park had walked a long, blood-soaked path to claim his throne. No one expected him to vanish so quickly, erased without a final speech. Yet he had only been a pawn in the true puppet master's hand. The Heavenly Warrior's strange warning echoed relentlessly in Shin's mind. If he refused to ascend and abandon humanity, he would lose everything he loved. That prophecy lingered like poison. To understand it, he would have to find the Heavenly Warrior himself and take his head. Sometimes Shin fell into long silences, and the dark aura around him unsettled even allies. To distract him, Gina decided to show him something interesting. She brought out a safe recovered from Twilight's secret room, claiming something valuable lay inside. Shin disliked digging through others' belongings, but curiosity had always been his weakness. He activated a lock-breaking skill and opened it with surgical precision, like unlocking someone's destiny. The trick worked instantly. Skills like that could land him in the FBI, though he cracked safes faster than they opened cases. Inside lay a document that looked ordinary, worthless at first glance. Its true value lay in secrecy and the consequences of exposure. The first paragraph was enough, a contract between Cheongjo Guild and Park Tae-hoon. According to its terms, all North Korean dungeons would fall under Cheongjo's control in exchange for cooperation with Twilight. As Gina processed the scale of that deal, Shin received an urgent call. Hwan reported that the purge was complete, and every traitor collaborating with the enemy had been identified. Shin acted as if hearing this for the first time, though he had already attempted to deal with them himself. Amid recent chaos, he had nearly forgotten about his sister demanding his immediate return. Perhaps turning off the phone would have spared him the storm of furious complaints. The secret documents also revealed names of additional hunters who had returned from Murim. True martial masters, level 50 and armed with dangerous experience. They were now aligned with Cheongjo Guild, sharpening their skills for future clashes, which meant the Supreme Sword Emperor had a new objective: track down these masters and recruit them before they evolved into the next looming threat. The faster he tracks down the Cheongjo members aligned with the Heavenly Warrior, the more threads will lead straight to the true puppet master. Speed matters, sure, but without strategy, even the fastest hunter turns into target practice. The moment Shin crushed his first real heavyweight, new obstacles rose instantly, like someone queued up the next boss fight in advance. Right now, hunters across the globe are debating the explosive merger of Dawn and Twilight, clueless about what storm it might trigger. At the same time, word spread that Mr. Gao had gone completely off the grid, basically a public confirmation of defeat. Like Park, Gao had been drunk on confidence and paid the price in full. Even the skeptics now admit it. The man called the Supreme Sword Emperor is not hype. He is the real deal. Yet, somewhere in the shadows, a mysterious hunter seated on a throne has already expressed a desire to face Shin personally. He ordered maximum intel collection and strict avoidance of direct confrontation until the perfect kill window appears. All signs point to one truth. Park Tae-hoon was just the tutorial stage. The real trial is loading. Shin himself returned to Jeju Island, to Tamra Guild headquarters, where applause was replaced with fresh complications. First, on the agenda, a brutally uncomfortable talk with his little sister. She demanded full attention and made it clear that abandoning her in chaos again would cost him his head. Damage control became urgent. Otherwise, the conversation might have escalated from words to blades. Some phrases are better left uncited, but one thing is certain. Shin genuinely apologized for the first time. Meanwhile, every news feed was dominated by Mr. Junho's press conference. He officially announced the guild merger and promised a new era of stability, where rivalry would become history. While cameras captured every syllable, Gina was already digging into the guild tied to the Heavenly Warrior. The risk of evidence being wiped clean was too high to waste even a second. Upon arriving on Jeju, Shin endured a flood of apologies from Tamra's leadership.
The local leader admitted he had allowed traitors to operate under his nose. He vowed to atone, but Shin sensed the infestation might run deeper.
His instincts whispered that some rats still had not revealed their true faces. That meant a full internal sweep. Trust would no longer be handed out casually. Then came an unexpected proposal. Merge Tamra with Dawn. Not necessarily total absorption, just a transfer of elite talent to strengthen both sides. For hunters like Hwan and Kim, this was a golden ticket to level up. Ideally, Shin wanted to gather Jeju's finest and integrate them into Dawn's structure. The old Dawn versus Twilight rivalry was now obsolete. It was time to unite against monsters, not each other.
Through this consolidation, Shin aimed to expand influence over the island and secure a prime hunting ground for Cheongjo traders. Wrapping up the meeting, he asked about the nearest dungeon. Rest was starting to bore him. Inaction irritates the Supreme Sword Emperor. He needs friction to breathe. Mr. Kim strongly advised against bringing mages or archers. The dungeon's conditions were too specific. Anyone entering that portal could forget about sight-based abilities.
Hallison Dungeon was infamous for its suffocating, oppressive fog.
The mist was thick, like wet concrete, distorting sound, direction, even spatial awareness.
When monsters hunted, attacks came from every angle without warning. Dozens of hunters had died there without ever seeing what hit them. The creatures blended perfectly with the haze, turning into ghosts inside gray nothingness.
Precision strikes were useless. Only wide-area attacks and raw energy bursts worked here. On top of that, the monsters possessed monstrous physical strength capable of smashing reinforced barriers.
If Shin wanted a warm-up, he would have to treat this seriously. Judging by his expression, he barely listened to half the explanation. No wonder they call him insane. He practically hunts danger for sport.
Listening to briefings bores him. Testing reality firsthand is far more interesting. Only two types walk that path, madmen or future legends. There is no third option. Stepping into the fog-choked world, Shin felt a strange familiarity, as if the past brushed against his shoulder again.
A cool breeze kissed his skin after the island's heat, yet the dense mist swallowed everything, turning the battlefield into a silent, waiting trap. Mr. Kim could not abandon his idol, so he stepped into the portal alongside the others, swallowing his fear and forcing his legs to move.
He promised a hefty bonus to everyone if the dungeon was cleared, knowing that cash is the cleanest motivation in moments like this. Opportunities like this do not drop often. Standing beside Korea's strongest hunter makes even suffocating fog feel slightly less cursed. A floating magic sphere lit up the immediate perimeter, slicing through the haze and keeping the squad from stumbling into rookie-tier traps.
Right before the raid kicked off, Shin dropped a question that froze everyone mid-breath. He wanted to know if there was an absolutely safe zone near the entrance, an area where monsters never spawn under any conditions.
Kim answered confidently that no attack had ever been recorded near the portal.
The moment those words left his mouth, reality decided to clap back. Dark flashes swallowed hunters one by one until only a single fighter remained standing in the suffocating fog.
For a split second, it felt like some dumb prank from the team.
Then a roar exploded behind him, and it was obvious. This was no joke. This was that FAFO moment when the dungeon collects its debt. Shin had been waiting the whole time and moved precisely when the attack took shape.
He activated magic and slapped the monster so hard, it felt like a tournament strike, launching the creature back into the mist.
The lone fighter tensed to his limit. Visibility nearly zero, landmarks erased the 5 Hunyoy SM Tradaesh.
It became clear that the monsters dissolved into the fog and only materialized at the final heartbeat. That was why no one could prepare in advance, and almost no one could parry in time. Doubt vanished. This dungeon could not be cleared by average hunters without power from another tier. Shin had to step in and burn out the source, or the island would keep paying in blood. Blue flames ignited around him, casting sharp light into the darkest corners. Through that glow, he spotted silhouettes early and roasted the creatures like they had wandered onto his personal grill. The first wave of lethal beasts was erased without much resistance. They gathered mana crystals and caught their breath while the fog thickened again.
The hunters stared at him as if an avenging angel had descended straight from the sky.
None of them had seen someone casually combine multiple class skills without breaking a sweat.
The squad leader exhaled heavily, realizing they would have been shredded without him.
Shin asked him to step aside to discuss one detail.
He needed confirmation. Had attacks ever occurred right at the entrance before? Kim admitted they had not, and guessed that infrequent raids might have altered monster behavior.
After a short exchange, they decided to continue the sweep and move deeper.
A few dozen meters later, the group encountered another pack. This time, the blue creatures were visible even through the mist, their forms glowing with an icy sheen. Shin refused to gamble with lives and stepped forward alone to clear the perimeter. The team felt a strange mix of impulse and paralysis. They wanted to help, but fear glued their boots to the ground. Master Kim ordered them to stand down and let the pro finish the job. Watching the fight, it became obvious that things had changed since the last raid. The monsters were more numerous and their tactics sharper. They no longer rushed head-on. They baited, circled, and struck from blind zones. After a quick scan, Shin sensed something off in the structure of space itself. He made no rash conclusions and calmly suggested pushing further. Hours later, after grinding through tension and silence, the group saw something strange. Before them stood a wall of fog so dense it looked like the world simply ended there. To test the depth, one hunter hurled a magic sword straight into the white void. A clear metallic impact echoed from within as if the blade had struck something solid. Most of them flinched, but one expedition member smirked with unsettling confidence. He ordered everyone to prepare, warning that what approached was no ordinary beast, but the true master of this zone. Weapons were drawn, eyes met, battle stances locked in. Above their heads, a massive shadow began forming inside the fog. A colossal mist monster emerged, pink eyes blazing and fangs gleaming like polished steel. The creature was so enormous it felt like a living extension of the dungeon itself. Against an enemy like this, standard gear meant nothing. This would demand power far beyond routine raid levels. Kim snapped into command mode instantly, assigning roles and ordering everyone to fight like there was nothing behind them but a cliff and the abyss. At first, the Supreme Sword Emperor did not interfere, watching their coordination with quiet interest. He needed to be sure this squad could survive and win without leaning on his power every single time. When it became clear they were holding steady and the monster was gradually weakening, he calmly moved deeper into the fog. The air grew heavier, the mist thicker, humidity clinging to his skin like a suffocating film that disrupted even his breathing rhythm. Suddenly, another pair of eyes flared behind him, cold, predatory, belonging to a completely different class of monster. He did not even fully turn. His fist met fangs, and the ambush ended like a basic sparring drill. A standard dungeon rarely hosts such a variety of species, which meant something here was fundamentally wrong. A few steps further, the fog abruptly parted, revealing the outline of strange gates. A logical question surfaced. Was there another portal hidden inside this dungeon, leading to an entirely different dimension? He paused for a fraction of a second, analyzing the spatial structure. Usually, his mind calculated 3 moves ahead, but now logic hit an invisible wall. The gates could not be influenced, neither by magic nor by energy perception. They flickered between real and illusory. Moments later, the squad leader approached and reported that the wounded monster had been fully eliminated. He noticed Shin's strange expression and could not grasp what had drawn his attention. From Kim's reaction, it became obvious. No one but the Supreme Sword of the Emperor could see the gates, which meant the Heavenly Warrior was playing God again. A risky hobby when your opponent has already survived hell and came back stronger. While Shin stood before the invisible portal, Gina was still at the office late into the night. After the guild merger, the workload had multiplied, and weekends were officially extinct. Secretary Dongwan recovered and steady, methodically sorted documents trying to bring structure to chaos. Sometimes he even regretted surviving. The current schedule hit harder than any wound. This time, he brought news that sent a chill through the room. There were casualties in a new dungeon. Despite the rapid organization of an investigation team, the raid had failed. Several mid-rank hunters would not return home, and their bodies were so damaged that identification would be extremely difficult. Reports suggested they had not even activated their skills, erased instantly without resistance. While Gina considered how to respond to this new threat, her ally wrapped up matters on Jeju Island. When he prepared to leave, fans refused to let their hero go for a long while. Now he headed towards Seoul, where familiar streets and the city's scent promised the start of a new phase. His sister tried to talk to him, but part of his mind still wandered through that fog-filled dungeon. A green crystal rested in his pocket, the reward for clearing the raid bundled with a bag of mandarins. Lately, high-level monster dungeons had been appearing far too often. If such zones were not controlled, the world could tip toward large-scale catastrophe. One mistake would be enough for a dungeon break, unleashing creatures into reality. But the real issue was the portal only he could see. Everyone else looked at him like exhaustion had started playing tricks on his brain. Some even gently suggested rest, and maybe a professional consultation.
Yet his instincts screamed that this was directly connected to the Heavenly Warrior. Trying to lighten the mood, Seoul suddenly asked if he was actually dating Gina.
The question blindsided him. In his mind, they were just partners. But if it looked different from the outside, maybe he had been ignoring something obvious. That night, Gina never made it home. Work consumed her like a storm surge. When she woke up, she realized she had fallen asleep at her desk. The first thing she saw was a perfectly mannered man calmly sipping tea and watching her. A closer look shattered the illusion. It was not an aristocrat, but a madman equally capable of killing monsters and enemies without blinking. He admitted he had been sitting there for about an hour, unwilling to wake her. Gina explained she was buried in work due to the activity of the Cheongjo Guild. There were no breakthroughs yet, but a Chinese informant had begun digging deeper. Mid-conversation, a strange numbness seized her body and the world blurred. When she regained awareness, she found herself in Shin's arms, caught just before she hit the floor. For a second, they froze, like wax statues in an empty museum, reading each other's faces in dead silence. Even without trying, it was obvious a spark had jumped between them, quiet, dangerous, and way too loud to ignore. Then they both stepped back and split apart like nothing even happened. Gina hijacked the awkward pause and steered the talk toward that incomprehensible dungeon that had popped up out of nowhere. The moment she heard the details, she decided to check it personally, confirm the threat level, and sniff out any hidden trap. When Shin saw her injury, he barely kept the anger from detonating on the spot. Gina admitted she went in alone just to scout the situation, refusing to drag the team into the unknown. Inside, she even had to trigger the shadow game, and it still only bought her one monster kill. She had never faced a dungeon like this, where the rules rewrote themselves mid-run. If the mechanics kept shifting, raids would spiral into pure chaos, where survival came down to dumb luck. Shin got interested instantly and decided to personally test the structure of that anomaly. He was used to thinking of himself as the exception, so a higher difficulty setting did not scare him. The second he entered, he saw a blazing volcano spitting pillars of fire and ash. The stench of scorch warned him that lingering here was a death sentence.
1 minute in, the supreme sword of the Emperor did what any normal person would label certified insanity.
He stepped forward and leaped toward the molten crater like he was diving into a chill pool.
In the same instant, a gigantic volcanic monster rose from the lava, throwing off brutal waves of heat. Shin actually looked pleased to meet it and calmly tried to communicate. He wanted the dungeon's rules, but the monster answered with nothing but roars and streams of magma. Its sheer size was ridiculous. Every step of the Titan shook the earth. Magma ran down its body enough to melt any unprotected hunter in seconds. This thing was so hot that any fire mage nearby would look like an amateur playing with a lighter. Melee fighters would not survive that temperature, and their hits would only scratch the glowing armor. For most hunters on Earth, this dungeon would be a no-mistakes execution. Only blue flame and mind suppression techniques had any real chance here. The first clean strike shoved the beast down into the thick lava sludge pooled around it. But its regeneration instantly rebuilt whatever got torn apart. Now it was genuinely interesting how Gina had managed to kill even one of these giants. Most likely, she matched its attack rhythm and caught a brief vulnerability window. Shin could feel some unseen force holding the monster's body in a stable form. Focusing harder, he spotted a pulsing red core inside the lava shell. A clear target finally appeared. Build the defense right, then wait for the opening and land the decisive blow. Mid-fight, the system notified him of gradual level increases. That meant this monster was insanely valuable for growth beyond most known dungeons. After finishing the clear, Shin returned outside and felt cool night air hit his skin. Walking through the dark forest felt good, letting his body cool down after that volcanic furnace. He made a call, like he did not even notice a silhouette hiding behind a tree. Shin asked for the dungeon rights because a risky, borderline crazy plan had already locked in inside his head. The figure behind the tree listened hard, trying not to give away a thing. Gina caught the point immediately and agreed to transfer control, understanding the scale of the idea. She was ready to back him all the way if it meant cracking the secret of that cursed place. After the call, her thoughts snapped straight to China. The hint was way too obvious. The next morning, Shin entered the dungeon again, this time with his little sister beside him. She was shocked by the monster level and barely held her defense together. Once her brother cleared space and stabilized the situation, it was time for her shot. She had to shatter a massive crystal, and Shin promised her a trip to Disneyland as the reward. Sol focused, channeling all her magic into the arrowhead. The shot had to be flawless. One tiny miss would wreck the entire plan. After the explosion, the system notified a level up. In a single shot, Seoul jumped 5 levels, her personal record.
She was racing toward level 50, something that had felt impossible not long ago. Now it was clear. This dungeon was the perfect launch pad for explosive growth.
Train here regularly, and progress would be inevitable. Even simply existing in a high-risk zone accelerated development. Hours later, with tears of joy, Seoul hit level 50. What used to be a dream was now real. She had become a high-rank hunter. She promised her brother she would listen and keep leveling up for real. Shin was not falling behind either, reaching level 65. 13 tiers in one training session became his personal record. To celebrate, he gifted his sister a skill cube he had taken on Jeju Island. Now she had to lock in the results and hold her status. Shin vanished for a moment, letting her finish the training on her own. The instant he disappeared, the spy in the tree clenched his fists in panic. The guy started biting his nails, trying to keep tracking the target. He did not notice the portal opening behind him, then death stepped out of it. A light touch on his back was enough to make him understand it was over. The little rat bolted forward, like outrunning teleportation was a thing, like arguing with gravity, only dumber. Shin calmly used spatial movement, appearing right in front of the runner. With every step, the distance collapsed to 0. The harmony of pure art did not resonate with the prey, meaning this was not a true Murimborn. The technique made it obvious this man was tied to the same forces as Gao's fighters. If this was one web, then something even more dangerous was sitting at its center. And if Shin did not get answers right now, he was about to flip into berserk mode and tear the target to pieces.